Hello, and welcome to Empowering Oregon's Youngest Readers for Success, a Smart Reading Virtual Literacy Summit event. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Ray White, a longtime friend of Smart and a fan of Smart, and excited to be your co-host today, along with Chris Otis, Smart Reading's Executive Director. Reading is the gateway to learning and opportunities for kids. I know I'm in good company. You are all here today because you believe in that too. And we're here to learn together about how we can ensure Oregon's kids are developing skills they need to read and succeed. As a former programs manager for SMART in the Salem area, I know firsthand the importance of the organization's work to support kids and our students in the schools by providing access to books and regularly reading support. And as a father of two young kids, I've continued to witness the power and importance of reading as I've watched my children develop their early literacy skills. I'm looking forward to this event, y'all, and learning with you all today. And we have a great lineup of guests to share with us and help identify effective and tangible ways that we can support Oregon's youngest readers and develop the vital skills of literacy. I'll turn the mic over to our co-host, Chris Otis, here in a minute. But before I do, let me share a little bit about her. Chris joined Smart Readings as an executive director in December of 2010. And in that time, she has effectively led the organization through a strategic planning process that has resulted in impressive program growth and improved financial stability. With her at the helm, Smart's readings numbers of children served has grown by over 70%. Which has been an achievement by aligning the organization's efforts with key state education goals and working to gain a deeper understanding of the populations the organization serves. Through the pandemic, she has led SMART with a steady hand, staying focused on continuing to deliver on the mission in a dramatically different landscape, and maintained financial stability and essential support along the way. Chris has more than 30 years of experience in nonprofit leadership and received both of her MBA and bachelor's degrees from California State University in Sacramento. And that's quite an impressive leader, to say the least. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
All righty. Thank you, Ray. It's so fun to see you again. I always just enjoy working with you. You know, once a smarty, always a smarty. So thank you for being here. And I join Ray in thanking all of you for joining us here this afternoon. We're excited to have you with us, and we appreciate the interest that you have in making sure that our young students get the support they need to become lifelong readers and learners. I'm really looking forward to learning from our speakers today, not only learning about how we can support our young students in their literacy development, but also celebrating and lifting up the strength and resilience of Oregon kids and families. As part of marking SMART's 30th anniversary this year, we set out to hold today's Literacy Summit as a way to bring attention and focus to the work we've been advancing for 3 decades. 30 years ago, our founders, who were Oregon community and business leaders, understood that literacy is a critical building block for vibrant, thriving communities. And importantly, they knew it's not solely the responsibility of our education community to ensure success for our students. They believe there's a role for all of us, members of the business community, foundations, congregations, neighbors, to collectively be engaged in the process. As the proverb says, it takes a village to raise a child. And that's why we and our community of volunteers come alongside Oregon's highest need schools to support kids and build brighter futures. The SMART model is simple. Research shows that reading engagement and access to books are 2 critical factors for young kids as they learn to read. And our program pairs volunteers, 5,000 of them across Oregon, with pre-K through 3rd grade students for weekly one-on-one reading session. Each of the more than 11,000 kids we serve annually also get to pick out 2 new books each month to add to their personal library. Now, like many organizations over the past 18 months, we've had to adapt our services to a very different, and for us, a very virtual environment. to share a bit more about our work to spark joy and opportunity through the magic of a shared book, and to take a look at a few of the ways we've adapted our programming in light of the pandemic. I invite you now to share a brief video we put together last year for our virtual fundraiser, Oregon Reads Aloud.
Since 1992, Smart Reading has existed to spark joy and opportunity through the magic of shared books. We've always known that reading is a critical gateway skill for kids, and we use books to help kids open doors to new possibilities and establish strong reading habits.
We give kids the 2 ingredients they need for reading success: one-on-one reading time and books.
We've been bringing kids and adult volunteers together to read for nearly 30 years. But in early 2020, everything changed.
When the COVID-19 pandemic shuttered schools across Oregon and moved students into a new realm of remote learning, SMART had to close programs early for the first time in our history. And with students experiencing interruptions in their learning and isolated from their teachers and classmates, we knew that ensuring they had books in their homes would be more important than ever.
So we got to work.
Between March and June 2020, we delivered over 30,000 books to kids using entirely new systems and improvised distribution sites. Amazingly, it was during this time that SMART surpassed 3 million books given to children, a huge historical milestone.
At the same time, we started planning for the 2020-21 school year, which we knew would be unlike any other.
While we weren't able to serve kids in person, we found creative ways to continue to deliver our mission the SMART way, with care, dedication, intention, and focus. Many of our 5,000 volunteers have filmed themselves reading stories aloud to help build a video library that's free and accessible to kids at home, anytime they choose. We're piloting a new virtual model, which connects kids and volunteers on Zoom for reading sessions using our brand new virtual story room. We've launched a pen pal program that allows kids and volunteers to connect by writing back and forth about books and reading. We've expanded book distribution to include entire classrooms, which means we're serving even more children with book giveaways than we have in years past.
This is just the beginning. This year's work to adjust our programs won't stop now.
Our new uses of technology during the pandemic have helped us identify new growth areas, which we'll carry into next year and beyond. We will continue adjusting, evolving, and learning how to better integrate our new programming into the smart reading of the future.
In this challenging time, kids need smart reading more than ever. They need the inspiration and knowledge you can find in books. They need connection, joy, and laughter.
They need all of us in the smart reading community.
And we are committed to being here for them no matter what.
Wow, that was great. And I know that SMART has continued along the path of developing virtual programming that is rolling out to kids across Oregon this year. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for our first session in the State of Early Literacy in Oregon. Khalid Ladd is a social entrepreneur with a passion for equity and education transformation. Her background spans from teaching and program manager to policymaker and chief executive officer over the last 20 years. A co-founder and former leader of Kairos PDX, Khalid continues to serve as the CEO of Children's Institute. Khalid is also a member of Oregon's Early Learning Council and a trustee of the James F. and Marion Miller Foundation. Jennifer Patterson currently serves as the Assistant Superintendent of the Office of Teaching and Learning and Assessment for the Oregon Department of Education. She has been an educator for 20 years, serving as a teacher, instructional coach, principal, and senior director of schools. Alyssa Chatterjee is the Early Learning Systems Director in the Oregon Early Learning Division. She has a focus on early learning policies throughout her time working for the state of Oregon over the last 9 years. And prior to her appointment as the Early Learning Systems Director, Alyssa served as Governor Brown's Deputy Education Policy Advisor. Now I turn it over to my co-host and moderator of this session, Chris Otis.
All right, thank you, Ray. And my thanks again to the panelists who are joining us here today. It's been a pleasure to get to talk to you as we got prepared for this, and I'm really excited about what you can all share with us. I'm actually really excited too that you all know one another, you've worked together, so we have the opportunity here in fielding questions to have some conversation back and forth, and I'm sure all of our attendees today will be just thrilled with what you have to share with them. So as Ray mentioned, this is our opening session. So we've invited folks here on the panel today who we think can do some stage setting from a broad and statewide perspective. So we're going to have some questions here for all the panelists and then a few for specific people on the panel. And we will work our way through this. So if y'all ready to go, let's get to it. All right, so this is directed to each one of you to share with us independently. But based on your role, and again, we're talking sort of statewide picture here for folks, but based on your role and where you're sitting, what have the impacts and implications of the pandemic been for Oregon's kids and schools? So I can call on you or you all can just jump in there.
I was going to say, who wants to go first?
I think you do, Khalid.
I don't need to. I think what a year, right? It's hard for me to think about the last year, not only in the context of pandemic, but the context of a sort of rupturing of the norms that we know, and also a heightened racialized violence. And so the communities that I am working in often are experiencing multiple pandemics at once, if you will, not just COVID, but certainly what happened with the murder of George Floyd and all the things that followed that, the hate against the Asian community. So I think it has created a storm of sorts that has, I think, huge impacts on well-being in particular for children. So because emotion and intellect are intermingled in the brain, the fact that the emotional health of children has been impacted means their ability to learn has been impacted, their ability to focus has been impacted. And so that on a macro level, I think, is one of the huge impacts over the last year. But I wanted to read a quote from Children's Institute does work throughout the state in several communities, from Portland to Forest Grove to Beaverton, Lincoln County. And I wanted to read a quote by a principal, Angela Graves, in Cornelius Elementary School in Forest Grove. And she said that while students' technological literacy increased over the last 2 years with online learning, students' literacy has been significantly negatively impacted. Imagine trying to learn to read online when you've never been to school before and you don't know the alphabet or that letters connect to sounds and make words. This year in second grade, we are starting with the alphabet and connecting letters to sounds. Normally, this is something that happens in kindergarten. But our second graders, our current second graders, didn't get a full kindergarten experience. They were sent home to do packets 2/3 of the way through their kindergarten year. For most of first grade, which is a huge building block in literacy, they learned online. Now they are in school in person. And while we're not starting from scratch, we are having to go back to the basics to fill in the gaps of their education that was stunted by the pandemic. And so she says it better than I, someone who was on the ground working with children. We also got a quote from Perla Rodriguez, which really, she's a principal also in Forest Grove, and she talked about that the one positive, so I don't want to leave it on a negative light, the positive is that the love of reading that we instilled in children prior to the pandemic is still going strong, and that it was worth it, because literacy is not just about sort of phonetic expression and putting words and sounds together. It's developing this love for a thing so that even when we don't know how to do it perfectly, we want to do it. And that is the light I will leave us with as we head into our discussion.
Well, thank you, Khalid. Thank you for getting us started off in such an articulate and expansive way. But I very much appreciate you speaking the smart language there in the end. This is about getting kids excited about and engaged in reading. So yes, there's still the opportunity in the bright lining there. So who wants to pop in here next?
Happy to go, Chris. And definitely beautiful, brilliant words, and appreciate centering educators' voice. in answering that question, because there's no doubt, as Khalid named, that they are in many ways closest to our children, outside of our families, of course. But what I would really highlight is what we learned and discovered about the role of the schoolhouse and how important it is, the role that school plays and what promise it brings. And in the absence of it, we all felt it. And this isn't universal. I think there's certainly places to tend to where and how belonging is created and for whom. What's also true, however, is that it is, I think, a renewed opportunity to center the power of school for children and what happens in schools and how we cultivate belonging, and how belonging is like, it is the root of literacy learning. And when we do it well, and we tend to not only relational belonging, but instructional belonging and institutional belonging, and we really crack open the ways that schools can be when created and designed in response to community and children that they serve. They can be culturally affirming spaces, racially affirming spaces, identity affirming spaces. And that's the taproot of literacy, is that when literacy gives a window for students to explore who they are, explore the world through their lens, to activate their voice, that's where we know the power really lies. And there is nothing that can replace the power of in-person learning in community, and the social context of literacy learning. It is an accelerant that we can't find anywhere else. So I will just say that what I learned for sure in listening to stories and watching kind of learning come back to life as children re-enter our school buildings across Oregon this year is the deep power and potential of what we can create in terms of powerful learning experiences that affirm students' identity and belonging when we pay attention to the right things, and are responsive in our practice.
Wow, thank you, Jennifer. And I love that power of the schoolhouse. And I think we said it across SMART, as we had to come out of schools in March of 2020, and our 5,000 volunteers had to step away. There was a collective, sigh and sadness. And I think it was being away from that community that they had felt there. So Alyssa, go for it.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think Jennifer and Kelly have done such a beautiful job of really capturing the nuance and the complexities of the impact of this pandemic. I think from the early learning perspective, this has really highlighted the importance of those quality, stable early learning environments. And I think to Jennifer's example and Khalid's examples, the importance of the early grades as well. And so really being thoughtful about maintaining those strong connections and fostering that love of literacy, but all of the development that happens in those early years, and the critical role that our educators play, that our families play in supporting that. And I think, what we've been hearing from our providers is, as children have been experiencing more trauma through this pandemic, due to housing insecurity, food insecurity, as families have struggled to maintain jobs, as Khalid pointed out, with the increased racial injustices and the murder of George Floyd and the impacts on our communities of color. There are many hardships and many different layers of trauma that children are experiencing. And that's showing up in the classroom, whether that's in childcare for our 0 to 5-year-olds, or whether that's in K-12 education. And so I think really trying to be thoughtful about how we're supporting our workforce, how we're providing that support to community inclusive of families, inclusive of our educators, from childcare on into K-12, so that we really can come around and support our families, support our children, to be successful and to sort of come through this pandemic stronger. And I think, at a kind of political and policy level, this has really shined a bright light on the important role that our educators play at every stage of education, from birth and on. And so we really need to build on that and leverage that. And I think the more we can elevate those stories from community, elevate the stories from families, it's important. It's important for folks to hear, and it is really going to be the best way to understand what children are experiencing and what our families are going through. But I think literacy really is one of those through lines for growth. We know it has tremendous impacts on the trajectory for graduating, just like access to high quality early care and education can see a strong through line as well. So really focusing on those areas where we know there's a strong return and an ability to really support children's future growth and learning is more important than ever.
Thank you for that, Alyssa. And I want to stick a little bit with what you sort of created a nice segue for there. And that's really sort of on the a little bit on the policy side, but and I'll direct this question first to Jennifer, but would encourage, as we said before, anybody to chime in. But sort of even pre-pandemic, we know that the governor and the state were really prioritizing early literacy, and we're identifying challenges and or opportunities pre-pandemic. So how would you say, and you want to articulate sort of the pre-stage, but what if anything has shifted as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that if anything, there's been a deepening of understanding of the role that literacy plays. I mean, I think through the stories that you heard in the opening question, there's no doubt that there are foundational experiences that children benefit from in their literacy lives, and when those don't click into place or they don't have an opportunity to have enough practice or instructional exposure, there is an opportunity and a need to have more literacy learning. So I would say what we're seeing right now is a real need to be very responsive and really responsible in how what we do with the time that children are in our care. So probably more than ever before, we're having to think about how to integrate literacy across the learning day. That was a topic before pandemic. It's even more important now. So how do we create classroom learning that's brimming with language and literacy all day long? I think is a really important foundational idea. The second is just really using community and family, which SMART is so centered in, to really wrap around our children two things. One, this affirming, beautiful belief in that our children are thinkers and therefore they're already readers. And so how do we view our children through this abundance asset-based mindset? How do we see their strengths before their needs? And how do we help them say, oh my goodness, you are ready to start writing and reading because you're already thinking about stories. And if you can think about stories, then you can write one yourself. Let's sit alongside each other and get a pen to paper. So thinking about the way that we frame and like harness and shine a light on children's assets as thinkers, their schema, their lived experiences, the way we pull those in through the classroom and help leverage community assets and family assets to connect the learning and to bring the home into the classroom and bring the classroom into the home. I mean, that is really where magic starts happening, and to help parents also come alongside us. And parents are the best at this because they're children's first teachers, and parents naturally see all the strengths their children bring. So helping to also ask for parents' input around where do you see your child's literacy strengths, and build on those, and also for parents to shine a light for families to say, here's what they're doing really well. They are sitting down and making really smart book choices, and they are stretching themselves as readers, and they're working hard on stretching into longer words and connecting what they know about sounds and letters into their writing. So I think just like as much positive mindset that we can build on what students are doing well, what they're able to learn next, and connecting that family school bridge is really critical. And then the last thing I would say is tending to the quality of the instruction. We know that task predicts performance. We know that complexity of text is incredibly important. And we know that linking writing to reading is one of the best ways to deepen what children are making sense of, and how deep their cognitive thinking is able to extend and expand. So that's what I would highlight as being most important, pre-pandemic for sure, and likely even more so now.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. And I can go to another question, but I want to make a little space here in case Alyssa or Khalid had anything you wanted to add in
Yes,
there.
I just want to underscore what Jennifer said around the asset-based framing, because I think the data is sort of grim, and we're constantly talking about the fact that kids from low socioeconomic households, kids of color, are really impacted. The scores are down. And if we don't have an asset-based frame, I think it was Laura Smelaguzzi, the founder of Reggio, said, the way we think about children orients the way we act towards them. And so if we have this mindset like, oh my gosh, the kids are so far behind, oh my goodness, like these kids, certain kids are that it will impact how we interact with them, and we lose the rigor and the high expectations that are required for children to excel. There is a way, I think one has to manage expectation and pacing of learning literacy. When children are behind, you can only accelerate so much, but unless we have those high expectations, we view our children, all children, with an asset-based lens. We'll dumb down the curriculum. I think years ago, No Child Left Behind days, they called it the soft bigotry of low expectations. I fear that there is a danger of that again because of the way the data is coming out and who it's impacting. We need to keep those high expectations. We need to keep that rigor. You know, strong educators know how to pace learning, but keep that, front and center as we re-enter classrooms and supporting children and families. As Jennifer also articulated, families are first teachers and they are assets as well. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you for that. I mean, that's a really beautiful way to reframe the way that we talk about and think about what we're seeing and what is or is not coming out of this. But I do want to probe on that just a little bit more. And I would put this question to you, Khalid, but the others as well, around this issue of research and what we are seeing. And I think we're all, the last 18 months, we've all felt personally, we've observed, as a larger community in a country, we've watched what's happened, but there's an eagerness to understand what's the data telling us about what's happening for kids and education. So what are we starting to see around that?
So before I read off a bunch of data points, I want to look at this at both a macro and micro level. And particularly with childcare at the macro level, we are seeing the decimation of an entire sector, right? So during the pandemic, childcare facilities closed at huge rates. A lot of childcare exists in family-based, home-based care. So losing a sector of the population means a lot of children didn't have access to early learning. And we all know how quickly the brain is developing in the first 6 years of a child's life. So that is very significant. The fact that parents are trying to manage, working from home schedules, death, a lot of death in a lot of communities. On top of that, their babies are there and they're trying to manage them. And so the fact that we lost so much quality early learning experiences for children, the data bears out that it's pretty egregious. And on the childcare side, I want to be aware of that. Also, schools, because of COVID protocols, even though they're reopened, they're hugely understaffed. So we're seeing in the K-12 system, all of the supports that would typically exist in a school, and we're not going to get into an education funding conversation, but I don't know that schools are always as equipped as we'd like them to be. Even still, we're seeing a reduction because of COVID protocols. If you're sick, you have to isolate, you have to stay home. It doesn't matter if you're a teacher, a paraeducator, you name it. So schools are struggling to provide the capacity to support children when they're in session. And we see some schools in Oregon, districts have closed for a week at a time and gone back to online learning. So I just want to set the macro level realities. Things are not normal in any way that they were, prior to the pandemic. And we're still struggling with huge capacity issues. The data that I want to share is the NWEA did an analysis of math and reading achievement through their MAP testing, and they were comparing, pre-pandemic to now, and they showed that overall Gains were made. However, the gains were lower relative to a typical year, not surprising. Historically marginalized and economically disadvantaged students had larger declines in math and reading relative to advantaged peers. And it's important to know that MAP is measuring growth. So it's not a snapshot assessment. The MAP is a measure that is used multiple times within a given year, looking at the growth of a child, and then you can compare year over year. So they are seeing that the decline is high. The students who could least afford to lose grounds are the ones that they also found was that younger students were much more impacted than older students, suggesting that online learning was more difficult for students in the lower grades. And so the early learning piece becomes, I think very important here. And how are we supporting children, I would say in preschool and then kindergarten through second grade, that they are the population that have been most impacted by the pandemic. And we also know that the students that were in high poverty schools were most impacted as well. So the way that schools were able to pivot and support children differed based on the school themselves. And we know that our schools are unfortunately segregated economically. And so students attending low poverty schools saw much higher rates of decline than students attending schools that were more economically, I don't know, strong, for lack of a better word. So those are the big data points that I would highlight. I'd also say from an early intervention standpoint, there are a lot of different learning needs with different children, and the ability to provide early intervention and supports for children that are not typical learners. I think the pandemic had a huge impact on children with any sort of special need, and any, whether it's dyslexia or ADD, that this period had a net impact on that population too. And with reduced resources, how are we supporting children who learn differently, recognizing that the format that we had was particularly detrimental to them. So that's the research I have.
And that is a lot of really interesting research. And I appreciate the larger frame on that as well. You mentioned something though, and I want to sort of direct this to Alyssa around the impact on younger students. I mean, so often when we're talking about kids and what's happening to them, we're thinking K, or for us anyway, K-3, those early grades where the focus around reading is really happening, but there's a lot going on around literacy development in that pre-K and even earlier than that. And so I would toss this one to you, Alyssa. I mean, what are you hearing, thinking? What's any data that the department or the division is identifying?
Thank you. Yeah, as Kali mentioned, we saw such a huge decline in our availability of childcare. And while we were one of the states that allowed childcare to operate in an emergency capacity, we still did not ever reach the numbers that we had pre-pandemic, and we're still recovering from that. Even for the programs that did operate, a lot of our Head Start programs, they moved to virtual. And so you've got 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds trying to learn through packets, trying to learn online, and just recognizing that there's going to be limitations to how much you can help support early childhood development and early literacy in those formats. Even as we're trying to return, I think, to Kali's point about how different communities are impacted, we know that our programs in Oregon, there are eligibility requirements that are typically tied to income. And these tend to be communities that are experiencing multiple barriers, right, in terms of access to services and opportunities. And so our Head Start teachers, our families who utilize Head Start, are seeing increased cases and impacts of COVID. They're experiencing those multiple hardships that we mentioned. And so it really can create this multi-layered effect. And so even as we're returning to in-person, you're still seeing that limitation of who can actually return to the classroom as an educator, who can return to the classroom as a child. And really it's that slow return. And then you have our children who missed they missed their year of preschool or their last year of preschool, and now they're heading into K-12 without those supports. And for our most vulnerable kids, that's really where we have a lot of our concern. Programs like Head Start that have all of those wraparound services and supports that are so critical for family stability weren't able to be accessed in the same way. I think what we're trying to do kind of on the state side is provide as much financial relief and resources to providers as possible, providing physical supplies, cleaning supplies, face coverings, gloves, things like that. But ultimately, we need to be able to stabilize families and get them access to the resources they need to be successful. I think we're even looking, as we are talking about expansion of access to these programs, how can we really look at those wraparound supports? How can we look at those other sectors, human services, housing, health, and the role that they play in supporting these families, and making sure that these programs have connections to those resources, or have additional funding to make sure we are meeting the children who have disabilities or who are experiencing delays, so that they can be successful and get the support they need as they're heading into those early grades going forward.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alyssa. And as you were talking, and just about, the challenge is sometimes really just in with much younger students, as we have developed a whole suite of virtual offerings for our students. There are some that just don't play as well at that early age. So I think it's just really challenging, and a different way that we all need to think about how do we support our youngest learners in this process. So I want to pause and give anybody else a second if they wanted to chime in on any of that. All right, then I'm gonna switch gears a little bit here to from talking about, oh my gosh, all the challenges that there are, to thinking about in a very proactive way. What are the things that we should be doing now to support our kids and our families? And there have been some comments around that, around celebrating family and looking, on identifying and accentuating assets of children. But let's talk, from your perspective, 3 things that you think we should be doing now to support kids and families. All right, I'm going to call on somebody. Jennifer.
3 things. This is hard, but I would say the first is really looking at how to provide extended learning time, and there's additional federal funds. We're constantly thinking about not only extending the quality of the learning within the school day, but outside of the school day. And what we can really utilize the family environment, the home environment for the child to extend their learning into that in ways that are, again, affirming and create opportunities for inclusion for the whole family to join in the literacy learning. But I would say extending learning time is a really big focus and emphasis, and thinking about where and how we do that. Paying careful attention to summer learning. We invested deeply in summer learning as a state this past summer. We'll continue to do so with strategic investments from ESSER $3 federally, as well as helping people think creatively about ways to use their current funding to extend summer opportunities for students. So I'd say extended learning time without a doubt. I would also say a real focus on deepening attention to ways to create more attunement to culturally sustaining, culturally responsive ways of teaching and learning. And that starts from everything to how teachers think about their children, feel about them, and the conditions they create in the classroom, so that when children are greeted in a school, they are seen in the same way, that parents hold their children. I mean, that's our job in schools, is to greet them with that same level of care and love and affirmation that is so, so important. And schools should be extensions of the home in that way, where families feel that we're holding their child and supporting them. So I think the way that we create the conditions for learning in the classroom, that emotional sense of connection and belonging, and other ways of being, doing, and knowing. So expanding in ways that create a much more a much more inclusive environment that isn't as centered in one way of doing, knowing, being, in terms of linguistic and cultural dominant norms that often center instruction and create experiences where children just don't feel like they're at the learning table. So that second piece is really shifting the text we use, the storylines of learning that we're investigating, and creating more culturally sustaining, responsive learning spaces and opportunities for kids. And the third, I would say, is really, we know that the quality of the teacher is the most important indicator for student outcomes, and it is an incredibly important thing to tend to. So there's a lot of challenges, as Bennett alluded to, in terms of staffing right now. And there's still a lot we can do to build the competence and the skill set of our teachers in terms of how they teach literacy and how they frame their literacy lessons every day, and the quality of text that they bring and put in front of children, the quality of talk that is engendered around those texts, and the quality of writing that's connected to them. So those would be the three things that I would say. Again, hard to pick three because there's a lot of actions and a lot of things we can do in this moment to really center literacy and center students.
Phew, and those were three big things. But just to recap, extended learning, so additional opportunities, cultural awareness and attunement for kids, and quality of the teaching, so supporting our teachers in that. All right, so there's three there. Okay, let's go to Khalid.
Okay, top three things. I think number one for me would be support community-based organizations. I think it's not realistic that schools are going to be able to fill the gap on their own, and community-based organizations are often rooted in community. There are many organizations led by members of community, and there's trust there. And I think, I open with the realities of somewhat of the socio-political context that we're in. That eroded trust. It eroded trust not only between each other, but with our institutions, including institutions of learning. So community-based organizations often are bridge builders between those two things and are brokers. And I think that trust and that is so important to get us through this period. So supporting community-based organizations, and particularly culturally specific ones, since the children that are most disproportionately impacted are children of color and our children in the rural areas as well, those organizations serving our rural children. Social emotional learning, I think, is, as I said also in the beginning, my number two is emphasize, prioritize, center social emotional well-being in the educational experience. For too long, it has been siloed from the space of education, and mental health matters. We call it more social emotional. I think when children are young, it sort of shifts more into mental health as children age. But whatever you call it, our children will not thrive if they don't have that social emotional wellness, and they will not learn if they don't have that social emotional wellness. And I keep saying it because, like, literally our brain functions in such a way that our well-being impacts our learning and our ability to have executive function and decision making and all these things that our brain does that is so powerful. When we feel threatened, when we're stressed, it shuts down. So I would love to see a higher prioritization. I've seen it just even in my children's school around saying this is important, and we need to check on kids and see how they are, even if they are 6. It doesn't matter. They don't have to be 16. And then I would say the last thing is family partnership. Families have come up many times because families have been more engaged in the learning of their children than ever before over the last year. Parents who never wanted to be a teacher found themselves all of a sudden a lead educator in their household. So I think families, what the blessing is that I think families appreciate teachers more than ever. And I hope that one day we will, support our educators across the continuum with better pay and all that stuff. But in the short term, let's figure out how to partner with our families better. Families are in it, they care. Kids kids are embedded in their family, whether they are good teachers or bad, they are first teachers. So the more that we partner with families, I think the better teachers they are. So those are my three.
I love those. All right, just so for all of you out there keeping score and you want to write these down so you know what we can be doing, support the community-based organizations. Bless you for that. Social emotional learning. Let's pay attention to that for our young students and emphasizing family partnerships. So thank you, Khalid. All righty, Alyssa, bring us home on this one.
All right. Well, I mean, I think I'll build a little bit off of what Jennifer and Khalid have shared. I think on the partnership front, really looking at partnership beyond K-12. So when you're thinking of community-based organizations and culture responsive organizations, also thinking of the childcare providers, the preschool educators in your area, these are programs that have much lower ratios. In some cases, they're spending 10, 12 hours a day with each child. And there's a lot of rich knowledge and expertise that these educators carry, and a lot of learning that can be shared between our systems. And so as we're really trying, as kids are missing kindergarten and entering in first grade, or they're entering second grade, missing those critical building blocks of first grade, we've got a lot of knowledge that we can be drawing from our early care and education educators throughout the state. I think on the parent front, supporting parents, as Kali said, looking to expand opportunities for parent education, home visiting supports, and really supporting that social network for families, because again, they're juggling being a teacher and being a parent and being in the workforce and trying to make ends meet for your family, and acknowledging that and offering those opportunities for relief and respite, and also offering those opportunities for support and shared learning in community. And then I think it's related to the workforce. Our early care and education providers, our early educators are not well compensated, and yet they play such a critical role in the success of our children long term and in the stability and success of our families. Because if you don't have a quality, trustworthy, stable environment to leave your child, you're not going to be able to go back to work, or you're not going to be able to remain in the workforce. And we want to know that our children are cared for and loved. And as Jennifer said, really have that extension of what children are experiencing at home. And I think that's another opportunity for that shared learning, because when you think about the childcare provider your children went to, you probably feel a sense of warmth. You probably feel that sense of extension, because there's such a deep trust needed when you're giving your young child over to someone to care for during the day. And so I think there's a lot we can look to in the early care and education space, in that birth to 5 space, and learn from and apply in the K-12 space, and really kind of link arms and work through and grow through this together, so that we can address all of those needs of our kids and families in an all-encompassing way.
All right, Alyssa, thank you. So I love that partnership beyond K-12, and really thinking about that early learning space and how we wrap in and think of partnership really in a very broad context, and supporting our parents and our childcare providers. Certainly, I think if there is things that we draw out of this time, that we've spent in the last 18 months together, we have realized the power of our parents. We knew that already, but the emphasis on the power of the parents, and really the need to support our parents through this process. So, all right, let's go from maybe to a little bit more of your personal take on the last 18 months. So what's your biggest learning throughout this experience that we've all had individually and then collectively?
I can start. I think a learning has been we are so much more nimble and flexible and resilient than we ever imagined. I think state government is a great example. We've not been known for our ability to support telecommuting. We've not been known for our ability to pivot towards virtual platforms. And we all had to shift quickly, and we've done it. And there are places where we'd much rather be in a room together at whiteboarding, or just having community engagement in person, absolutely. But I think it's a good reminder that it's not looking at things and saying we don't do it that way. It's saying we haven't done it that way before, but really reframing and saying, there's opportunity for growth and progress. And I think that while that's happening in state government, I think that's happened for our communities across the state, across the country. We've been faced with impossible barriers, and we've overcome them in so many ways. And we will thrive, and we're continuing to grow. And as hard as these last 18 months have been, and as disproportionately impacted some of our communities have been, that resilience continues to shine through. And my hope is that it helps drive continued progress and growth at a rate that we haven't seen before.
That's beautiful. Thank you. That resilience factor. And I want to go to Kali and Jennifer as well, but I neglected at the top of the hour to say that the chat function does work for this conference. So if you have questions from the audience that you want to pose to our panelists, feel free to do that, because we may have a couple of minutes here that we can open the mic up for your questions. All right, so Kali, Jennifer, who wants to go next? Your personal takeaways from this experience.
I mean, this is such a personal question. It's hard to know. And you, Alyssa, were so positive. I was like, challenged by my initial thoughts. And so I guess I'll just follow my own vulnerability here and share. I think very personally, what I will say, I mean, there's so much to draw from, but I personally have thought a lot about what does it mean to be raising young children and having this confluence of multiple pandemics, as Kali named, this racial reckoning among us, and trying to also, there's so much that we're trying to help our children make sense of, and that we're trying to make sense of, in how we're interconnected to one another, and where and how the fabric of our connectedness is strained and pulled. And that also is showing up in just the very real challenges of, like, how do you sustain, working and parenting, and, the rhythm of life that gives kind of like daily, sustenance and spaciousness to even, to kind of like function in a healthy and balanced way. So I feel like I'm in this struggle of a very close in challenge of this last year, where everything it felt like everything was condensed. It was like everything happened in the home environment, where you were providing childcare. If you needed to go to the doctor, it was like on a phone call or a Zoom. Like, everything was happening from the home, which was this incredible opportunity, and also a really significant challenge for me personally, and I think for a lot of parents, and just how to manage all of that simultaneously happening, and not having access to a lot of the pieces and places that are so fundamental in creating a larger ecosystem for how we sustain one another. And then I'm really thinking deeply, in the skin that I'm in, and the role of how we bring deeper consciousness and around privilege and justice and oppression into the conversation, and what our personal responsibility is, what my personal responsibility is, as a parent, as an educator, and how easy it is to be removed from what Jeff Duncan Andrade talks about, the proximity of the pain. And just, I've thought a lot about that, feeling a lot about it, and where and how, particularly when we're in the pandemic, we're really kind of isolated in our communities or homes, how difficult at times it felt like to connect in to others, lived experiences and stories, and how it felt like it was further kind of fracturing and disconnecting us from one another, in a time where we really need to rely on one another and understand one another and reach out to one another. So I don't know if I even made any sense, but that's my reflection upon your question.
That made perfect sense. And I really appreciate and applaud the vulnerability in talking about, what this has really felt like. I mean, we have all experienced this, certainly as people who, part of our workplaces and part of our community, but we experience this as individuals. So there's a very personal side to that. So thank you for sharing that. Khalid, you want to add into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my mind went to, because you said, what is your personal learning? I went to sort of myself as a parent as well. And I think one of the biggest learnings was the importance of creating emotionally safe space for children, which I know obviously intellectually, but what does that mean in real time for your kids when they are experiencing these stresses along with you? And, for my own children, particularly my son as a Black boy, he's looking at all this stuff on the news. He's hearing all of these narratives and sound bites around people trying to kill people that look like his dad or him or his grandpa. And like, how do you help a 9-year-old make sense of that in a way that centers humanity and kindness and allows them to, I don't know, still be a child? Like, it is very difficult. And so my heart particularly goes out to parents of color or parents raising children of color, because this was a tough year with what was happening with schooling and the pandemic, but was also psychologically, I think, a very tough year to be in Black or brown skin. You were seeing people in cages in the border, or you were seeing there was just so many things. And as a parent, trying to create safe space for my children, but also help them understand reality, teach them empathy and kindness when they have every right to be angry. And so those were some of the things. And I think this idea that kindness cannot be overrated. And I was listening to a Freakonomics podcast that was talking about how much vitriol is happening in our society, and that, I like the neuroscience that neurologically, kindness can overcome contempt in the wiring of our brains if we lean in and intentionally practice it. And we have a default to contempt when we are absorbing news and information in the way that we often do through, whether it's, I didn't mean to make this super political, but this was such a political year. Like, it was such a political year. And I think, yeah, in my mind, I've thought a lot about how do you create that bridge for children and teach them kindness emerging from a year like this. And one thing I'll say as a nod to SMART is, I think one of the most powerful ways to teach is through literacy and narrative and storytelling. And so I guess I'll end on that note. Never before do I see literacy and storytelling and narrative being so critical to helping raise children to be inclusive and empathetic and to understand belonging and acceptance of self as well as others. And so everything Jennifer said about the importance of representation in books and literature, I had a number of parents reach out to me during that time and say, how do I help my child not be racist? There's so much in children's literature that can help all of our children be better than ourselves. So I'll end there.
And if I could get off mute, I think we're going to sort of bring things to closure there. I mean, I don't know how to put a better bow on it than to think about leaning into kindness intentionally. We've all been through quite an experience over the last 18 months, and we need to lean into that kindness for ourselves and for the people around us. And while I still have the mic, I'm going to thank our panelists for your time with us today, everything that you shared with us, your humanness and vulnerability in being wide open to our audience here this afternoon. So very much appreciate that. And one final note in terms of leading into kindness and appreciation, since I have the mic, to my SMART colleagues. You have been an amazing team of people over this last 18 months, and we wouldn't be here able to lean into our work and still support kids in the ways that we need to and we want to without all that you've done. So with my appreciation to you, and again to our panelists, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you.
Wow, that Wow, I'm already blown away in the first session, and the chat is continuing to be lit up with so much emotion and so much underlying of what our panelists just recently said in this first session. So thank you so much to Kali, Alyssa, and Jennifer for taking the time to share your inspirational thoughts of what's happening individually and institutionally across the state of Oregon for our kids. So at this time, we're going to actually take a quick break. So please join us back here in 10 minutes and we'll continue our discussion in our next session. And welcome back, everybody. Thank you for coming back to our event today, a virtual literacy event. And in a few minutes, we're going to get started with our second panel of strategies for literacy and learning success. But first, let's take a look at a brief video featuring volunteers, educators, and students talking about smart reading.
I absolutely love smart reading because it's an amazing program for not only the students, but the volunteers as well. Volunteers share their love of reading with their smart reading buddies, and in turn, the students receive a gift of a lifetime, the love and the joy of reading.
I love smart reading because I love hearing new stories.
I love smart reading because it gives my students the chance to build their reading skills while also growing their home library.
I get to take books home.
I love the SMART program because I want to instill the joys of reading.
Smart reading allows students to really enjoy reading stories that they might not be able to.
It helps my students develop a love and passion for reading.
I enjoy the expressions on the children's faces when we read the book that they chose.
I love it in the smart reading because now I love the funny books that I read.
I love smart reading because it gives the students who I feel need it most the opportunity to feel special, to have a little extra time and attention from a caring adult, and it provides them with a safe and positive reading experience to encourage them to find joy in reading books.
There's nothing better than being with a 5-year-old who's totally engrossed in a book or who's laughing at the silliness of a story.
I like smart readers because I like to watch them read.
Hi, I'm Miss Malloy. I'm one of the first grade teachers, and I just want to say thank you so much to the smart readers. We really appreciate all of the books. The kids loved getting them. They wanted to read them immediately, and we like to keep them in their cubbies so that they have something to read, especially this year that's tricky that we can't really have a classroom library. So it's been a lot that they get their very own books to take home. We appreciate all of your support.
I love smart reading because we can read books.
I love smart reading because it puts books in the hands of my kindergartners who need them, and it gives them time to spend with someone who loves to read.
I love SMART because SMART is sharing the wonderment of reading wrapped in kindness. SMART is truly a gift.
Every time you do smart reading, you would usually get a new book for free.
Reading is succeeding.
I love smart reading because of the smiles on my students' faces when their reader shows up to our classroom.
I love smart reading because I love to read.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And I love smart reading too. Thank you for all the volunteers who have helped make smart reading so beneficial and for our community and for our students. Now I turn to our next session focused on specific strategies for supporting kids with their literacy and social emotional development. I'd like to introduce our speakers for our next session. Let's start with our moderator. Our moderator for this session is Afrida Davis, who has been a smart reading program director since September of 2019. She previously worked with youth of color in the public education system for 9 years. She is a veteran with the United States military, has been honorably discharged from the Army Reserves for 14 years of service and toured in Iraq. As a former foster youth and adoptee, she understands the power of stories and shares her own journey when it's the most impactful and best serves youth in care. She received her bachelor's degree in biology from Pittsburgh State University in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and holds a master's degree in executive and civil leadership management. Lily Duran has a PhD in educational psychology from the University of Minnesota and is currently an associate professor in the Department of Special Education and Clinical Science at the University of Oregon. She holds a bachelor's degree in elementary education from Antioch College and a master's degree in education and human development from George Washington University. She is currently an associate dean of academic affairs in the College of Education at the University of Oregon. Dr. Duran's research is focused on improving instructional and assessment practices with preschool, middle-aged multilingual learners. She frequently delivers presentations nationally focused on recommended practices in assessments and interventions with young children with and without identified disabilities who are multilingual learners. Additionally, she has served on multiple equity and diversity councils, including the National Association for Young Children and the Division of Early Childhood. Prior to Dr. Duran's work in higher education, she worked for 9 years as an early childhood specialist education teacher, both in Prince George County, Maryland, and in rural Minnesota. Lindsay Keeley is a university instructor of education, emotional and learning coach, social and emotional learning coach for families and schools, and the creator of Positive Choices Social and Emotional Learning and the Positive Choices podcast. Her university work, as well as her experience teaching in the public schools, helped her craft a curriculum that integrates neurosciences, social and emotional learning, and problem solving into a program that helps children and families thrive. And Jessica Palmer is the president and founder of JP Speaks Leadership, a life coaching business focused on empowering individuals to create lives that cultivate the possibilities that live within themselves. Jessica's enthusiasm and expertise for driving positive change are reflective in the professional speaking and coaching. She is also the early childhood program manager for Community Action Head Start. Jessica's background in early childhood education enables her to inspire educators and other professionals to develop the skills needed to improve quality of service, enhance relationships, and make a difference in the lives of children, our future leaders. Welcome and thank you to you all. Now turn it over to you, Afrida.
All right, thank you, Ray. And thanks to all of our speakers for joining today and for all of our attendees who are here with us. I hope you're enjoying the afternoon. The format for this session will include 3 brief presentations from each of our speakers on different aspects of strategies for supporting children with literacy and learning. We'll begin with you, Lillian Duran. Dr. Duran, I turn it over to you.
Excellent. I'm so happy to be with you today and be supporting this program. It's obvious that you do really important work in the community in supporting literacy. And so today, the focus of my discussion will be on why is early literacy important and some various strategies we can use to support all children in the settings that we serve. So with that, I think then we're going to run through my PowerPoint here. I don't know if there we go. Yep. All right, we could go to the first slide then. My first slide starts with, what is early literacy? So early literacy is important because it's the precursors to reading, and it's what helps children have the foundation that they need to be able to be strong and solid readers. What we do know is that literacy begins with language development. So even before kids are beginning the formal process of reading, their language serves as a foundation for reading development. And we also know that support for early literacy development can vary cross-culturally and in varied contexts, and is important to understand and honor the diverse range of approaches to supporting children's early language and literacy development so that we're sure to be culturally sustaining in our practices. Next slide. So why focus on early literacy? We do know that stronger early language and literacy development are related to higher reading outcomes. And we also know, which is why a program like Smart Reader even exists, is that reading outcomes relate to school and life opportunities. And children enter school with many diverse experiences related to literacy. And in order to level the playing field and give every child the opportunity they need to be successful in school, it's important to focus on early literacy skills. We also know that there are specific skills that are really important for later reading from the National Early Literacy Panel and research that's been subsequent to that, showing us exactly what we should target in early childhood. Next slide. So looking at those core skills that we should target, number 1, oral language, both expressive and receptive language abilities. Phonological awareness, alliteration, blending, segmenting, rhyming, all of these skills that have children manipulate sounds that they're hearing helps them with the process of reading, particularly because it relates to decoding. Alphabet knowledge is also important, the basic knowledge of letter names and letter sounds. Print awareness and convention of print and books helps children understand how to use books and how to use print in their environment, and the value of attending to print for meaning. All of these are the foundation of later reading. So early literacy instruction not only needs to meet the needs of all of the students that we're serving. And so in this presentation, I'm not only going to address general early literacy, but then I'm going to focus on the specific needs of multilingual learners. So when we think about all of the students in our communities, we need to think about those multilingual learners. We need to think about children with disabilities. We also need to think about children who've experienced trauma, abuse, and neglect, which is why it's so important. My colleagues here are addressing social emotional needs, which are the foundation of communication, which again is also the foundation of reading. We also really need to think closely about those children who've experienced the adverse consequences of systemic racism, including less access to high quality healthcare, affordable housing, effective educational opportunities, and safe, well-resourced communities. All of these can impact learning as well, can impact reading, and can impact the access that children have to the opportunities that they need to be successful. And then we also need to consider those children from families with compromised immigration status, and sometimes the risk that they have for not being able to access appropriate services. So here I'm going to focus specifically on meeting the needs of multilingual learners. As was addressed in my introduction, that's the focus of my research, and I thought today would be useful for me to spend some time focused on their needs. So what we know from research is that the evidence, there's many questions in the field, pragmatic questions about how to support home language, how to support English, what is the best approach to serving our multilingual learners? What we know from research is that if we support children's home language early on, specifically developing early literacy skills also in their native language whenever possible, we know that that better supports academic and reading outcomes in English. There's also a diversity in learners. Of course, we know that there are young children with disabilities. In fact, I was an early childhood special ed teacher and did that work for 10 years. What we know about our children with disabilities is that they are able to learn more than one language, and they are only constrained by their cognitive level. But if we offer them enough support, then they will be able to learn more than one language and be able to use those languages functionally across their different natural contexts. We also know, on the next slide, that there's a bilingual advantage. Given the global economy and increasing diversity in our country, there's actually a great demand for fully proficient bilinguals, and it's important for us to support this capacity in native speakers. And so as we are speaking with families about their children's home language, we need to recognize the importance of sending them the message that they should be supporting their home languages whenever possible so that their children can benefit from this bilingual advantage. We also know that children need to maintain communication with their families and their culture, and we want to be engaged in culturally sustaining practices, which means we need to be engaged in linguistically sustaining practices. And so when we support children's home language and culture through rich and varied early literacy experiences, we're also supporting their ability to stay connected to their families and their communities and their identity. So with all that being said, you will see in your resources that I supported a family language background questionnaire for you to use, which gets at how much of their home language and how much English is being used in their homes. It's important for us to know not just whether or not a home language other than English is being used in the home, but also how much of each language is being used. This allows us to think about the child's developmental profile in their languages, which I'll show you on the next slide. So as you look at children's home language, you might have children that are home language dominant. We call these sequential bilinguals, children who are primarily speaking one home language at home and then are introduced to English in our formal educational settings through early childhood programs such as yours, Head Start, and other early childhood program options in the community. Then we also know that there are simultaneous bilinguals. There are many children in the US who are speaking English in addition to one or two languages at home. For example, we know that there are many kids who speak English and Spanish at home, but also additionally might speak an indigenous language like Mum in their home as well. And so it's important for us to recognize the differences in skills between children who are dominant in their home language and those who might also know English and Spanish or English and their other home language, because our approach to them might be different. There are also kids who are shifting to English dominance who still speak a language other than English at home, but might at this point be more English dominant. I give this information to you because I think too often we think of our multilingual learners as one homogeneous group, when in reality, there's a lot of variation in the amount of exposure they've had to both their home language or languages and English. And it's important for us to understand this in our approach to early literacy with these populations. Next slide. So when we think about supporting language and cognitive development, I'm going to give you a few concrete strategies that we can use right now. It's important to have bilingual books on hand and also audio books in languages other than English. There are a lot of resources, and actually I might add a resource to your resource page because I have a list of different book vendors who supply books in languages other than English and languages even other than English and Spanish. At this point, it's fairly easy to find children's books in Spanish, but I know of vendors of different locations where you get books in Arabic and Somali and Hmong and all of the varied languages represented in our community. If staff are not available to have reading conducted in languages other than English, then try to find volunteers, community assistants, community organizations, high school students who need to get extra credit hours who can read to those children in their home languages or tell stories in their home languages. Also, whenever possible, it's important to conduct early literacy activities in children's home languages, which means that you would draw attention to the print. You would draw attention to how to use books in their home language, as well as activities such as alliteration, blending, segmenting, and rhyming, which we were discussing earlier. There's also the important practice of dialogic reading, and that means having a conversation around a book. Dialogic reading has a strong empirical base and has been shown to prove oral vocabulary development in both English and Spanish-speaking children. Overall, it increases oral vocabulary development because of the focus on eliciting verbal interactions during the reading with the child, essentially meaning you have a conversation around the book and the child does not sit silently while listening to the book, but instead is actively engaged in making meaning of the book as you're reading it. These are the prompts that are used during dialogic reading sessions. There are completion prompts. This is based on the book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So a completion prompt would be a question such as, the caterpillar turned into a butterfly. A recall prompt, tell me 2 foods that the caterpillar ate. Open-ended questions, what would happen if you ate all of that food? Who, what, where, why, who, what, when, where, why questions. What did the caterpillar eat last? And a distancing prompt, the D stands for distancing, connecting something in the story to something in real life that child has experienced. Have you eaten so much that your stomach hurt? As we all know at the end of the story, when the caterpillar's little stomach hurt, it's something that you could relate to the child. So again, if you could remember the crowd prompts, they're good for all children, but they really help elicit a verbal interaction and conversation during book reading. When we think about home language print awareness, we also want to label everything that you have labeled in English in the children's native language to the maximum extent possible. So you want to have these multiple languages represented in your classroom. If you have multiple languages, you might want to highlight different languages at different times so that children do not get confused with a long laundry list of labels around your classroom. This is a little example of vocabulary books that are supporting vocabulary success. Here are a few key points about supporting vocabulary success. Number 1, pre-teach vocabulary before jumping into lessons. So if you are going to engage in a book reading experience, pull out some of that key and novel vocabulary from that book and pre-teach it. Develop word walls as I'm showing here. And I'm going to show you a few more strategies for supporting vocabulary development. Use visual symbols, concrete objects, and interactive games and activities. And then provide that vocabulary support before, during, and after the lesson. In my classroom, one strategy that I used was making vocabulary books. I'm going to give you a few examples from the book Stella Luna. So if you see here, a bat might be a novel vocabulary word for students. So make a little vocabulary book that brings to life some of the novel vocabulary in the book. So you'll see here I have multiple exemplars of the word bat, as well as a small, short, child-friendly, developmentally appropriate definition for that word. A bat is an animal that can fly. It sleeps during the day, hanging from a tree. It stays awake all night long. The next one shows cold. You don't just want to focus on verbs, nouns. You want to focus on other parts of speech as well, so children can put sentences together. Here you'll see an example for the word cold. I am cold when it is raining and when I come out of the water at the pool. When I am cold, I put on a coat to get warm. These are just some simple examples of how you can support vocabulary development with simple tools, simple materials that you can make at home. Another example is a storyboard. This one's from Brown Bear, where you highlight the key vocabulary, simply laminate little cards, put them on Velcro, and children can manipulate them as you're reading the story. Next, when you think about vocabulary, modify the reading level and lessons as necessary. Choose books with concrete images and with less words on each page for beginning English speakers. Also, the strategy will work for children who might have language delays, who might be emergent in their English, or might have other disabilities that affect their language development. It's also important to use theme-based integrated learning opportunities. Themes provide multiple opportunities to provide or for practice with the same vocabulary in order to improve semantic mapping and meaning of new concept development. I also encourage us to overcome stereotypes and deficit-based thinking. This cartoon picture came from actually the National Public Radio website. It was a piece they had done on the 30 million word gap, and they had posted this, but took it down after many individuals complained about the stereotypes involved in this image. So even in organizations that are progressive and you believe aware, such as NPR, there still can be these implicit biases against families of color, families who are low income, families who are otherwise outside of what we have deemed the norm of middle-class Eurocentric values, which is why I began this presentation, that we need to recognize the multiple ways that children become literate, are exposed to early literacy in their environments, and honor those. We should honor those and build upon them. You can see here the image shows the white mother speaking with her child and the Latina mom looking at a novela. We want to make sure that we understand that all families are ready and willing to support their child's early literacy and language development. And we want to do our best to support them in their efforts to improve their child's early childhood education and early experiences. So in the end, in conclusion here, I think these are the questions to ask when designing effective early literacy instruction. How am I incorporating those big five into instruction? Oral language, phonological processing, alphabet knowledge, print awareness, and reading comprehension. 2, how do I support language development of all children, including children who are multilingual learners? Do I find ways to support children's home language and literacy development? 3, how does my approach to early literacy instruction promote equity and educational outcomes across all children? And I think if you ask yourselves those 3 questions and strive in your best capacity to support all children in their early endeavors and early development, we will do a much better job of achieving equity and outcomes across the US. Thank you so much for your work and for your time today, and I look forward to the Q&A after the session.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Duran. Just the layers and layers upon information and support that you provided are tools that I know some of our, panelists, I see heads nodding, and also the folks who are joining us today have either used or might be new tools for their toolbox. So thank you, Dr. Duran. Next, we're going to go to Lindsay Keeley. Lindsay, we don't hear you, so you might still be on mute.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. And I just have to say, I am a SMART super fan. I learned about SMART when I was teaching kindergarten, and my students love SMART, the SMART reading program, so much that one of the first questions every day was, Mrs. Keeley, is today SMART? Even though SMART was the day before. We had SMART once a week, and they just couldn't wait for it to begin every week. So it's a gift to be here. And I just want to thank all the volunteers who are tuning in today. Wonderful. Well, today I'm going to be talking more about gifts, and more specifically, the gift of social and emotional learning, and how we can give this to others, regardless of your capacity. If you're a teacher or a volunteer, or just someone who wants to better relate to other people in your life, there's this gift that is social emotional learning. So I'd like to tell you a little more about that. So my name is Lindsay Keeley, and my whole journey started with teaching kindergarten. And when you're about to do something new and you have like a feeling for what it's going to be about, and then you start that new thing, like for instance, teaching or living in a pandemic, and it's totally different than what you expected. Well, that was certainly what happened to me my first year of teaching kindergarten. You can go to the next 2 slides. And there we go. So this was my reality teaching kindergarten. I took my class to the pumpkin patch, and we went to the petting zoo area. And this was a year where I had a lot of students who had challenges with regulating emotions and impulse control. And I knew that the petting zoo might be kind of a challenge, a stretch for our class. And sure enough, my students went out, and one student ran straight to a sheep and literally rode it around the petting zoo. And as you can imagine, the volunteers had like shock on their face. And I just went over to this student and I just said, "Here, buddy, let me help you off." And he kind of gave me a tight hug. It was like, he didn't know what was happening. He just didn't have control. And I was there for him. But at the same time, I knew I need support, because I had a lot of behaviors, not just sheep riding, but also students who would yell and run out of the room. And so social emotional learning became very important to me, because I needed to know how to support my students with that. We can go to the next slide. So these are examples of things: emotional regulation, impulse control, the ability to solve problems effectively. These were all things that my students were struggling with. And I learned that year that trauma can really affect our students' ability and children's ability to do all of these things, to regulate feelings when they feel really mad, to be able to problem solve with someone without hitting them in the face. So these are all things that when the brain is overcome and overwhelmed with toxic stress, this is a little visual I like to use. This is a picture of, it's like a glitter brain frame is what we call it. And when someone's really calm, this is kind of what it can look like. Your brain, all the glitters at the bottom, you can think of that as like your neurotransmitters, or the chemicals in your brain, the stress hormones. And when something triggers you or makes you upset, maybe if you're talking about your adult relationships, your partner says something unkind, or for kids, someone takes the book that they want out of their hand, it can make their brain feel all mixed up. It can make their nervous system feel flooded. And so what I would like to share with you today are some practical strategies about how you can help children's brains feel better and thrive under stress. And also, this is very helpful for adults as well. I think research is often called me search. And I know certainly my process of creating social emotional tools really helped myself. We can go to the next slide. So this was something that was really encouraging as I was trying to figure out, how do I help my students? How do I support them with those who experience trauma? And also all 5-year-olds, they need support with these skills. And something that really was important to me that came across in the research is this quote from Harvard's University Center on the Developing Child. And it boils down to the fact that the single most common factor of children who develop resilience, that ability to overcome hard things, and this is certainly something we know during the pandemic, resilience has been so important. One of the most common factors is just a stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, other adult. And I would certainly insert a smart reading volunteer. And the thing that I like about this research is it doesn't say one stable, perfect relationship, but it's just someone who's committed and who's showing up for children. And the beautiful gift thing we can do is that we can have intentionality with how we show up for kids. We can go to the next slide. Again, these are examples of problems that we can see. I know that in my collaboration with Smart Reading, I had volunteers who would come to me and bless those volunteers' hearts the year where I had the student ride the sheep, because during Smart Reading time, some of the kids would roll around and lick their shoe and all kinds of things were happening. But so I would kind of come alongside volunteers and give them some little strategies to help with these behaviors, because it can feel all encompassing when you're in the moment, when you're dealing with these things. We can go to the next slide. So the gift is that when we take these problems, these things that can feel really big, it can feel like we're putting out fires, even if it's your own kids who are trying to do school and you're on Zoom doing work meetings, it can feel like little fires that you're putting out. But if you just take a little linguistic turn, if you shift the way you think about problems with children, and instead you think about it as skills to build, social and emotional regulation skills, that's when you can really take these problems and turn them into a gift. So we can go to the next slide, and I'd like to show you how. So there's specific things that we can teach kids how to do. You can see this student is holding the glitter brain frame. Kids really love, they kind of latch onto this idea. Kids as young as 2 years old, I've done coaching in schools, in preschools, and they'll say, brain mixed up. So they're starting to realize, oh, my body feels kind of overwhelmed, out of control, and that they need support. So we can help kids. We can give them problem-solving tools. This is a picture of myself in my classroom. I had gotten some of these tools from a workshop and I was trying them out with my kids. And one of the things we can do is we can really empower children and make them feel like they have agency and autonomy, and they can make a difference. They can make positive choices. They can decide how they want to relate to one another. We can go to the next slide. And one of the best ways that we can do this is through literacy. We can use books as an avenue to teach kids social skills. They can learn from the characters. They can understand problems, cause and effect, and they're doing it in a really welcoming and inviting way. And so when I was teaching kindergarten and I was going on this journey of how do I support kids with their behavioral areas for growth, we could say it in that way. I had teachers come to me and say, Lindsay, we want to do the same thing that you're doing. So I was trying to figure out, well, how do I disseminate these tools? So I put it into a curriculum called Positive Choices, and it teaches these social skills with animal characters. We can go to the next slide. So turns out I wasn't the only teacher who had behaviors that needed support in the classroom. So I was able to move on to coaching teachers and giving them specific skills. And you can see these teachers are holding these little character stick puppets, and again, using literacy as an avenue to teach kids about a time where bear had a difficult time. If you're reading a book about a bear, it can externalize the problem. So it's not all about them. They can see themselves within the book. So basically, if we want to get down to the nitty gritty, how do we give this gift of social emotional learning? There's something I want to tell you about. It's the 3 C's. We can go to the next slide. And this is to connect, calm, and collaborate. And when you do this sequentially with your relationships, again, regardless of the age, this is when you can really see that gift and the beautiful thing that can come from relationships. So connection looks like getting down on a child's level and really seeing them. So let's say you have a student who was really upset because they didn't get the smart book that they wanted to pick off the shelf. That's an example that volunteers might connect with. So you could connect with them and say, oh, I can tell you're really upset. In this picture, this mom is using a mirror to have her child look in the mirror and see what he's feeling, kind of identify that emotion. And you're just there. You're saying, I know it's really tough when we don't get the things we want. Next slide. And what that's doing is that's building emotional literacy. You're helping kids understand where they're coming from. So rather than saying, that's not a big deal, look, this book's fine, you can take it, you'll get that one next week. When we take that moment to really pause and to say, oh, you're feeling upset, or maybe you're frustrated, that's a perfect time to teach and coach into that emotional literacy piece. The second C is to calm and to really take a productive approach in helping a child. If you've ever had someone say, just calm down, you're fine, chill out, right? That usually has the opposite effect. But when someone says, oh, I see you, let's breathe together. I'd like to teach everyone a breath right now. You're welcome to do this if you'd like. So if you take your hands and you put your hands together like this is called the volcano breath. Kids love this. And you breathe in and then you blow out. And that's like the lava coming down to your sides. You breathe in again. And that's a great way to achieve calm. Even adults, it works for adults. I'm seeing the panelists do it. Great. We can go to the next slide. This is the final C. This is to collaborate. So rather than telling kids what to do, forcing compliance, you're going to put your shoes on because I told you to, or we're lining up for lunch now because I said so. When we collaborate with them and we ask them to help us, well, what do you think? And how did that affect someone else? That's really when we get their investment, and really they're coming alongside with us and we have a common goal. You can go to the next slide. And basically, one of the key skills that we're doing as we're doing the 3 C's is we're building problem solving skills. We're allowing kids to internalize these skills and these strategies so that when we're not around, when no one's there to watch what they're doing, they're making the right choice. They're not hitting their brother. They're not taking one more cookie off the table because they're no longer complying with what they know the rules are. They're collaborating and they have a commitment to what it is that we're asking them. You can go to the next slide. So connecting, calming, and collaborating, what this looked like with my little buddy who rode the sheep, we'll call him Trevor. I was teaching a math lesson and I looked up and I couldn't find him. I'd gotten a phone call from a teacher saying, "Are you missing someone from your class?" And I said, "Yep, that's Trevor." So my class went out to recess and I walked up the stairs to the 4th grade wing where he had taken a self-initiated field trip. And I got down on this level, and here's the 3 C's. I said, "Hey, Trevor," I connected with him. "I'm curious why you're upstairs, or I'm noticing that you're not with our class. Can you tell me more about that?" And he looked frustrated. So we took a breath, second C is to calm. Volcano, there we go. And he said, "Mrs. Keeley, I'm really sad." And I said, "Really?" I thought maybe he was bored because he left my amazing math lesson I thought he didn't think it was entertaining, but he said, "No, Mrs. Keeley, I'm not bored. I'm sad." And I said, "Well, why?" He said, "I'm sad because I don't have any friends." It was December. I mean, we had been in school for a long time. And I said, "Oh, thank you for telling me." So rather than me taking this punitive approach of, "Oh, he broke the rules, he knows better. That's not what we do in this class." Rather than saying that, of course, I had to tell him, "You can't just leave the classroom whenever you want." But I could also say, "You know what? I think we can focus on building friendship skills. How about that?" So we went out to recess together later that day and we got some kids involved in being his friend. So that's the beautiful thing. When you stop and you give the gift of social emotional learning and you connect with kids and adults even, you learn more about them. You see the inner workings of their experience, their reality, and then you can come alongside them. And really, it's not only a gift to them because you're giving them skills, but it's a gift to you because you're really enhancing your social connection and your social network. One of the important pieces that come from that as well is empathy, accountability, and repair. So when we have kids think about, I wonder how that made Sarah feel when you acted this way. What do you think she was thinking? That's an amazing alternative to a punitive approach. Accountability, allowing a child to say, "Oh, we're going to go back in this picture here. There's a student writing a sorry letter to a friend." And so there's that accountability piece. And ultimately he had that repair by saying sorry and giving that. This is a picture, the last day of school, my little Trevor friend, we had paper. I said, "Everyone draw a picture of someone who's important to you, your champion of kindness." And he raised his hand. I went over and I said, what's going on? And he showed me his picture. And as you can tell, I couldn't quite tell who it was. And I said, "Who's this?" And he said, "Mrs. Keeley, this is you. You are my champion. You show me kindness every day." And so smart readers, smart reading supporters, thank you for showing up for kids and for believing in them and being their champions. And you can truly make a difference in your interactions with them. And as you do this, I think really the true gift of social emotional learning is connection. It's what connects us all. Thank you. And there's the website. You can go to positivechoices.com to learn more. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Lindsay. It is really a gift to give those tools and those skills for little people to manage their emotions. And I love your phrasing of that. And I'm going to take away that connect because it's about connection, right? Calm and collaborate. I love it. All right. Thank you, Lindsay. Next, we'll go to Jessica Palmer. Jessica?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. Like everyone here, I'm a huge fan of SMART, and we do a lot of collaboration with SMART in our classrooms, and our families that we have in our Head Start program see so many benefits and outcomes for their children. So I'm excited to be here today. What we know with early learning is that in the early years, children are developing skills to read the world around them, right? And our goal is to provide them with culturally appropriate ways to grow their language and literacy, to navigate the world. And this is done a lot of the times through language and literacy. So that's kind of what I'm going to be focusing on today. If we go to the next slide, we'll go over some of the objectives that I have for you. So we're going to review some of the just realities and the challenges that we're facing right now in early education and early learning with the pandemic and access to resources and socializing. And Lillian and Lindsay did a great job of setting the foundation for me. So thank you for that. And then we're going to talk about some strategies that you can use in the classroom and at home to support early literacy, given the challenges that we're facing. And then we have some resources at the end for all of you, and I look forward to the Q&A session afterwards as well. So we'll jump into what we know right now. And this isn't just due to the pandemic, but because of the pandemic, we are already seeing from 2020 and 2021 an even larger disparity between children that are living in poverty or that are from diverse backgrounds, have or been diagnosed with any type of learning or other disability. And there are some challenges that that population faces that are different and may need additional supports, but are also all of our children are facing, right? And so I have these 4 visuals there, and I'm going to go through them of kind of how I remember and think about the challenges that we're facing right now. So if you see the tree, that reminds me of that getting out to socialize piece that might be really difficult right now, as a lot of people are facing having to stay isolated at home. We're seeing classrooms having to close and children being sent home for weeks at a time or days at a time. And what that's really created is a difficult way for families and for educators to create community in the classroom or at home with consistent routines, right? And so, like, as Lindsay talked about, that connect piece, which is so important to social emotional learning, part of that is having a sense of belonging. And we know that all of us, not just children, but even adults, need a sense of belonging in order to learn and thrive, in order to be our best selves, right? So creating community has been a bit of a challenge. Also, attending school or play groups to socialize has been difficult, getting together with friends and family that we haven't seen in a long time. And although a lot of us have taken on the use of technology to do FaceTime and Zoom calls such as this, it isn't the same as hugging someone when you need to connect in that way, right? So virtual hugs are just not the same as those real hugs when you need empathy and understanding and support. So supporting that social emotional development and learning, we have some challenges to overcome and barriers that are preventing us from giving all that we have been able to in the past and more now that we see that that's what our children need, right, due to the pandemic. So the clock makes me think of developing routines and allowing children to have the opportunity to predict what's going to happen, right? And that creates a really solid foundation for them when children can predict their routines. And again, with the pandemic and being sent home or being told, okay, we can't leave the house now for several days, or we have to cancel plans to the pumpkin patch. We recently had a child at school just crying and crying because they came to school on Monday and said, I didn't get to go to the pumpkin patch like they had told us they were going to get to go do, right? Because the family that they were going to go with wasn't able to because they had to cancel due to someone being sick. And so the family decided maybe we shouldn't be going out at all to such a public place. And so we have to be creative and support our families through different ways of exposing their children to what we as maybe parents feel are experiences that we've always wanted our children to have. And we see that even in the early infant ages when, there's some children that have just not left their home very much and had that exposure, right? And so when they do go out, they can't predict what's going to happen because it's new for them. It's a new experience to go to the grocery store at a year old, where typically maybe children are going out much sooner than that. So the speaker visual there for me is the challenge of opportunity to be exposed to more languages, practicing languages, hearing different languages, and different ways that people talk and communicate, right? Through our verbal and nonverbal, the different tones of voices that we use. I have a friend all the time who I say speaks in song. And it's because oftentimes in conversation, lyrics will come to her and she just kind of goes into this sing-song voice. But I haven't heard that in 18 months of not being able to see people in person. And so our children are not having opportunities to, sing the songs and have the exposure to hearing the different languages and seeing the different languages. Part of that is also an opportunity to mimic what they're hearing. So children oftentimes when they're exposed to those things will come back and home from school and mimic those different languages and sounds. And that's something that's been a challenge too. And then the book really represents to me access to literacy, right? Our libraries were closed for a year. I mean, that is just mind blowing to me that our libraries were closed for so long. And there are still communities that are not fully open, right? We have some communities that are up and thriving and everywhere is open or open with limited capacity. And we still have communities where libraries shut down. And they said, we're no longer going to open this building as a library. We've moved books to this other library and now that library is gone, right? And so I think about the access that families have had to books during the pandemic, that children have had to books. And although, yes, we have the iPads and they can read books on YouTube and they can read books on websites and things like that, it is not the same as having someone sit with you and open a book and give you an opportunity to turn those pages and run your finger across the words and retell a story based on the pictures that you see and experience, right? So those are kind of the challenges and things that we're facing right now as our realities as we move into this second year with the pandemic still fully running. So if we jump to the next slide, I'm going to go into some of the things that we can do in classrooms, some of the strategies that we have for that. And I really encourage educators to look around their classrooms and see where they can promote literacy and in areas that even if you wouldn't typically have something in there, right? So being sure to have clipboards or utensils out, things to encourage children to come. So to ask them questions, like in the older classrooms, you can have invitations at every area in your classroom. You can have provocations out that are open-ended questions or even challenges. Older children like a good challenge in the classroom, like how tall can you build this? And have them practicing and writing the different things that they can do. And it also promotes conversation, right? For those open-ended questions and all the great questions that were shared earlier, just kind of those prompts that get children talking. And even with infancy, I love when children babble and you just say, oh, what happens? Oh, then what happened? What happened next? And the infants, they just keep going. You can literally have a conversation with infants that don't say words. And that's something that we definitely want to encourage at an early age. Talking or singing, asking children to tell stories, asking them to tell you what they see in pictures, giving them an opportunity to express language and repeat what you hear and extend on that. So if a child is saying like, oh, that's a big truck, what are other words that you can provide them that also mean big or large, or that is a tall truck? And then asking, what makes that truck so big? Why is it so tall? What do you think it needs those big tires for? Something like that, just to ask them and get their creative mind going and open to the possibilities of being a storyteller, right? That's one of the best things about working in early education is the amount of stories that you get to hear, because their creative senses have not been stunted in any way. They're just there to just tell you like it is. And sometimes their brutal honesty might surprise you. But otherwise it just fuels my soul. So I'm sure as all of you as educators, parents, community members, you're feeling that same way. One of the things that there has been a lot of increase of is lending libraries through education systems. So some programs have already had opportunities to have lending libraries for families. And I encourage you to look at if that's something that you have not done, then is that something that your program could offer, that you could offer, or is that something that's available? And one of the resources that I provided was a list of different types of books to have to encourage different languages and learning of different languages. So I encourage you all to check that out. But lending libraries is one of the things that I feel like some programs had started during the pandemic, and I hope that we, continue to see that as an option for families. Children fall in love with books in the classroom. And, in the grade schools, they have libraries where they can check books out, which is great. And in early learning, not all of the programs have libraries where children can check books out. So if your program doesn't, I strongly encourage having that for sure. So in the next slide, I wanted to list some things that parents could do at home or families could do with children. And one of the things that I realized over this last year is that moving to virtual teaching and virtual education has put a lot of strain on educators and families. And coming back this year of a lot more in-person education again, there are some basic things that we might have forgotten. Part of that is focusing on creating community, like we talked about with Lindsay, and that connection piece. And another piece is setting routines at home and time to just explore books and sit and play with language, using self and parallel talk, which before it was totally normal to, be in a classroom or be around other educators and say, oh, I need to go use the bathroom. And now, you don't always say that. You're on Zoom and you just kind of click out and you say BRB. And you don't state why you're leaving. And as educators, and even at home as family and parents, we can go back to using that self and parallel talk where we're saying, okay, we're walking into the kitchen now. It's time to get a snack. Oh, I'm pulling the cheese and apples out of the refrigerator. Basic things like that are just exposing children to more language. And in the classroom, using teacher talk, talking from one teacher to another, or talking to other children, like, yes, I'm headed over to my desk because I forgot I need to get my pencil. That used to be second nature for us. And after a year and a half of not having to use that language of always stating what you're doing, that's kind of fallen away, and we need to be bringing that back. And so parents can absolutely do that at home too. Like, oh, we're walking up the stairs together, especially with young children that might mimic that. And then you'll start to hear those new words and language, and it's exposure to vocabulary. Labeling and describing items. So part of that is just in your daily routines as you're putting on your child's shoes, or you are getting ready to leave the house, you can say, by labeling items like, oh, those are your shoes. You see your shoes right there. And it's okay. That repetition is very, very helpful. That's how we retain information, is that repetition. And so continuing to label and describe words. And when we talk about describing items, it's using multiple words that are synonymous to give more ideas and play with language that helps children's vocabulary grow. Dedicate time for books and book exploration. Oftentimes families like to do this in the morning or at night, part of like a morning routine or a bedtime routine. But it can really be any time throughout the day of just saying like, hey, this is the time we've dedicated to this. And going back to that visual of the clock, like thinking about when are times of the day that we can start to create these routines for exploring literacy. That can also be doing finger plays and singing songs like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and Itsy Bitsy Spider that a lot of us grew up singing, where, you know, you're using your hands and you're using language to be creative, and it really sticks with the children. I was FaceTiming with my granddaughter last night, and all she wanted to do is, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. And she just wanted me to sing that song. And every time I would stop, she would just start clapping. She just turned 1 yesterday, so it was her first birthday. And she would just keep clapping and clapping. And so she just wanted me to sing that song. And we did that for about 15 minutes on FaceTime last night. And so if you think about it, like a 1-year-old who just wants to hear, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands, where she gets to clap and hear language and sing in a different way than how I would normally be talking to her. And so that's a great way to explore language too. And then, as you can see in the photo there, tracing text with your finger or any item. As children get older, sometimes you have to be creative. I have my 15-year-old, and he reads to me all the time, and he does not like to trace with his finger. But reading has been so challenging for him. And so sometimes we'll just get like, think outside the box, silly, what can you use this time? Whether it's like the end of a spoon, or he'll look around the room and be like, what's in reach? And then we'll see if we can trace, words in the book with that. And so, remembering to think outside the box and make it creative and fun. And so that leads to using natural materials. I'm a huge connect with nature. Going for walks also promotes good social emotional development of being able to calm yourself and be present and in the moment, and use mindfulness and breathing to help ourselves stay calm. And it can also be fun to go on a scavenger hunt to label and point out things that you see outside. Give word and language and voice to the items that your children see. And then you can bring some of those materials in the home, sticks and rocks, to play with and create little, designs and pictures, and then tell stories about them. Telling stories is a great way to bring language in. So that is what I have for you today. So in conclusion, I encourage you to think about how you're promoting social emotional learning and how that's impacting early literacy. And I love to do call to actions at the end of my presentation. So I don't know if you can throw it in the chat, if you just want to shout it out in your room, wherever you are, write it down, but write down at least 1 or 2 things that, you've heard from the 3 of us that you're like, yes, I want to learn more about that, or I plan to implement that, or I'm going to advocate for that, or, just any wonderings that you have. And so I encourage you to say it out loud, write it down, hold yourself accountable to that, and know that in doing so, you're making a difference in the lives of our children, which again are our future leaders. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you all.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you. You just gave us a wealth of information, just not only about reminding us of the unique challenges of the pandemic, but also how we can take back some of that learning, some of those practices that we utilized before the pandemic, and reintegrate them in the way that we increase language and we increase our young people's exposure to books and reading and language, and just enjoying space with one another. So in this next part, we had anticipated a Q&A session, but just like all the lessons we learned in the pandemic, we still got more things to learn. So at this time, unfortunately, we can't jump into a Q&A session, but I do want to highlight the wealth of information that each of our panelists has shared with us. They've also provided a number of documents to follow up on that frames a lot of the tools that they mentioned, a lot of the resources that they have suggested that we access in order to continue to reintegrate some of the lessons we've always known about increasing literacy and social emotional learning for our youth, but then also a wealth of new tools that we can add to our repertoire. So I encourage all of our listeners, all of our watchers to access those PDFs and those tools. And I'm going to go ahead and conclude this session. Ray, are you out there?
Oh, I'm still here. I'm still here. I've learned a lot already. This has been phenomenal. So many strategies and lessons and tactics that I plan on using for myself, as well as the kids, my children and whatnot in this life. So thank you so much to our presenters. Thank you, Afrida, for leading that discussion and moderating that for us. And we're just going to roll right into our next session. So I'm really excited for this third and final session that we have today. That we're going to be focusing on within our Literacy Summit, focusing on highlighting the work of community-based organizations and how they are working to support early literacy. So in this session, our moderator is Anna Medill, who is the board chair of Smart Reading and the founder and CEO of Avenue, a B Corp digital social media marketing agency for the purpose-driven companies. Anna is passionate about having a meaningful impact in our community through volunteerism and serves on several nonprofit boards and city committees in Oregon. She is also a speaker and an instructor for organizations such as the American Marketing Association, Oregon State University, Portland State University, and Clark College on topics of digital marketing, entrepreneurship, and women in technology. And with our panelists, Lisa Harnish is the executive director with Marion and Polk Early Learning Hubs, working with and on behalf of the communities that are ensuring children are more than ready for kindergarten when they arrive. Literacy is a key part of supporting this work. And our next panelist, Sharon Juneman, is a 20-year veteran of educational equity programs for underserved student populations from preschool through college. She has championed educational opportunities for thousands of first-generation college students, immigrants, and students experiencing poverty. As an administrator, the adjunct faculty member at Mount Hood and Portland Community Colleges, her passion for the Shadow Project mission is fueled by her personal experiences as a parent of a child with learning differences. Sharon has a master's in arts and education from Oregon State University. And our last panelist, Zelinka Gardner, has worked with primary age children for the past 22 years. After beginning her teaching career at the Los Angeles Public Schools, Zelinka spent the last 13 years teaching first and second grade at Gatlin Gable School. As an adjunct professor in Lozikar Graduate School of Education and counseling for the last 6 years, Zelinka taught child development, literacy, and historical perspectives in education. As a founding partner, Zelinka has co-designed the scope, trajectory, and focus of Kairos PDX program and the theory of change. She serves as an instructional leader for Kairos PDX Learning Academy, facilitating partnerships with educational institutions, as well as recruiting, sustaining, and training educators and volunteers. Born and raised in Northeast Portland, Zelinka resides in North Portland with her husband and 3 children. Zelinka received her BA in psychology from Scripps College and has earned an MA in educational leadership and multicultural studies from Columbia University Teachers College. And now I turn it over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Ray. And thank you to you, Lisa, Sharon, and Zelinka for joining us today. We're so glad to have you with us, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. I'd like to begin by asking you each to give us an overview of your organization. What's your mission, what you do, as well as how you've pivoted and adapted during the pandemic. So let's start with you first, Zelinka.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for the time and all of you hanging in for this very, very rich day. So I am a co-founder at Kairos PDX. The mission of Kairos PDX is to eliminate the racial achievement and opportunity gaps by cultivating creative and confident and compassionate leaders. With a deep understanding from both our lived experience and a rigorous research background, along with a strong track record and professional expertise, Kairos is poised to make a real impact on the root causes of the racial achievement and opportunity gaps in education. To achieve this, we have a multi-pronged approach. We have our Kairos PDX Learning Academy. That's our flagship program. It's a public charter school. We were established in 2014. We're focused on supporting historically marginalized children through a model that's intellectually rigorous and healing centered. Our educational model is a balanced approach between direct instruction and inquiry. And our curriculum is culture responsive, incorporates workshop model, infuses mindfulness and restorative practice. We feel like it's really important to incorporate things like studio art and STEM and music and fitness in the daily lives of our students. The Learning Academy serves as a prototype to inform the greater system about education transformation. But we also have a community relations programming which builds trusting relationships between the Kairos PDX families and throughout their larger community. We really believe that we are part of a bigger system. We want to be able to provide that wraparound support and link arms with other partners in the fight for educational justice. Our government affairs program serves as a thought leader and collaborative partner in the movement for racial equity in Oregon. Kairos PDX stands on the front lines of educational policy and pushes for advocacy. And then the Kairos PDX Training Academy. Kairos PDX offers culturally competent consulting and professional development services cross-sector. Our trainings equip leaders to lead in an equity movement that's grounded in transformational change and rooted in the neuroscience of love and belonging. We provide training and professional development around rehumanization practices and protocols for administrators, educators, early childhood professionals, organizations, and businesses, providing the tools to do the equity work that Kairos PDX puts into practice daily in our programs. And when we think about the pandemic, certainly our flagship program, the school really had to pivot and shift as all education institutions did. We really focused on doubling down on what we do well, which is one of those things is relationship. So we actually, it's one of those pivotal moments in leadership. I called my whole staff together. I said, okay, at the time we served 204 children. I said, okay, we've got 204 children. We are going to touch every single one of those 204. We're not losing anybody. And that was, then they said, okay, and did it. Reaching out to families. We had multiple different staff members sort of repurpose because there weren't children coming into the school building to make sure that there were resources getting to families, that people were checking in with families and with children, both from a education standpoint, but then also from a like, how you doing? Like how you actually doing standpoint and building those relationships. I was impressed beyond measure with our families and the way that they showed up for their children and immediately like dealt with the learning curve of all the technology. We pivoted our family services to host online virtual family meetings that really initially were just a chance to say, we're all okay, right? Like, let's look at each other. Like we're going to be all right. Like we're going to do this, and really held space every day for this is hard, this is challenging, we're going to do this, we're together, and really leaned into what it means to be a part of a larger system, even as we were siloed, right, in our different houses. So a lot of pivoting, a lot of learning, and a lot of doubling down on relationship, even though it had to now be a relationship through the screen, is really what I would say happened over the pandemic for us. And thank you for the opportunity to be here with you all.
Thank you so much for that overview, Zalika. So how about you, Lisa? Can you please tell us about your organization and how you've pivoted during the pandemic?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm the executive director for Marion and Polk Early Learning Hub. It is so great to be here with you all today. And we are one of 16 early learning hubs in the state of Oregon. And our mission is really about convening, coordinating, and catalyzing action to help ensure that kids are more ready for kindergarten, that families are stable and attached, and also that services are coordinated and aligned. So we pride ourselves as saying that we work with and on behalf of children and families in our 2-county region. And that shows up in a whole variety of ways. We certainly have a lot of key major initiatives. We're primarily funded through the state of Oregon, and we also have some other philanthropic dollars that come through our organization that are designed to do just that, to help to support families and reaching out to families, as well as to coordinate and align the services that we all have, and bringing our community partners really together. So what that looks like in plain language is we have funding to help to support parent education that happens in our region. We have a real goal of making sure that parent education is just something you do. It's part of the fabric of everything that happens. And it's good to go to parent education, and people want to go to parent education, and really seeking out different thoughts, different approaches as a way to be a parent in this day and time. And so we just want that to be seen as the thing. So it's really woven in at the heart of a lot of most everything that we do. We also really reach out to the families and engage with families on the importance of early learning itself, helping families to know about different high quality preschool and opportunities, childcare opportunities that are available for them, as well as connection to other resources. And sometimes what that looks like is we may have a way to connect with families with resources, but we also then fund through a service integration team or community partners who are coming together to really meet those needs that are preventing or obstacles for families to do what they need to do for children. We also do a lot of training and supportive providers and early care educators across our region to have access to skills and professional development to help them along their educational and professional journey. And that has been a really major push for us, particularly the last couple of years when we think about the social and emotional needs of children, and wanting to really help ensure that our providers are equipped with some of the skills that they need to do that. The other thing that is embedded into everything that we do is literacy. People kind of joke with me that you'll just hand anybody a book, no matter where you are and what you do. And actually, that's kind of true. We look for every opportunity to help ensure that families have books, high quality new books in their home, that they are also encouraged in some of the skills and ways to interact with the words on the page or the pictures on the page to help connect with their child, encourage literacy development, and also just to really enforce some of the bonding between parent and child. So we do a lot of things like putting books in little free libraries all over our 2-county region. We hand books out at community events. We do literacy totes that we get out to families. We hand out books at all of our parent education opportunities. So we're always looking for ways to help to support that work. And they're always bilingual books. And they are also, we really look for titles that are really rooted in social emotional and behavior supports and just as a way to help embed some of that learning. We also, like everybody, really had to pivot as a part of the pandemic. And so we turned everything, just like Zalika, I called everybody. First of all, I think we all thought, well, this will be a 3-week thing, then we'll be done. But here we are 18, 20 months later. And we just pivoted. We started doing parent education online. We worked with our county mental health providers in doing support groups online, anything we could do to help reduce that isolation that families are feeling. And then also, like many other areas in the state, in our region, we were impacted by wildfires, and that created its own additional stressor for families. And so we worked really hard with community organizations to ensure that families have not only those physical things that they need, but also some supports to help encourage and keep kids busy during these really challenging, stressful times. And then also helping to connect to a variety of different resources to help meet their needs. So it's been a very trying time, but I have to say that it's also, we've proven to ourselves that we still can do the work, do it very well. And we are working harder now than ever to have an impact on families and the community. So thank you.
Oh. Thank you so much, Lisa. And now I'm going to pass it over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you everyone for joining us all this afternoon. It's so exciting to feel the community support. This is what fuels me, and I think I see my co-panelists nodding, to feel the support of all of you here gathered to really hear how you can join the work that we're doing to support children and children's literacy and their families is really, really supportive and empowering to us. So the Shadow Project is the only nonprofit of its kind in the country that specifically supports special education teachers to help students with disabilities thrive in school. We are partnered this year with over 45 schools across Multnomah, Marion, and Yamhill counties. And our programs help students increase their reading proficiency, their motivation, their self-regulation skills that folks talked about in the previous session, their emotional regulation. And this is so critical for students with disabilities because, again, as previous speakers pointed out, students with disabilities are among the state of Oregon's most vulnerable population, along with BIPOC students and students who are learning English and students who are experiencing poverty. These are the kids who were not being served before the pandemic. And now, as we've been experiencing these challenges together for the last, 18 months, kids in these groups are unfortunately impacted even more than they were before. So, students with disabilities thrive under that personalized teaching and the supports, the specialized supports that they get in school. Those are so critical. And so when schools shut down, a lot of those services ended. They just simply were not possible over remote instruction. And in addition, remote learning requires attention and time management and reading skills and communication skills that were already challenging for students with learning related disabilities. And so for a lot of the students in the population that the Shadow Project serves, it was just kind of a disaster, frankly. And so, the Shadow Project, we knew that because we as an organization are powered by people who either experience disability or are closely related to kids or adults who experience disability. So we knew this was a true crisis. So when schools closed down, we knew we had to act fast. And, like Salika and like Lisa, it was, that moment where you said, okay, are we doing this? Yes, we're doing this. And so in a matter of 3 weeks, I think, we converted all of our programs to either a virtual model or we got resources through our partner schools directly into the hands of families so that they could support their children trying to learn at home. So just a few examples, our virtual goal setting program, teachers, we made it into a virtual program that had been a classroom-based program, and teachers responded. They said, this is the only thing that's getting students to log on to class, to complete homework, to read at home. And that's because our goal setting program connects students to what their goals are, and then it gives them some concrete endpoints to work towards. so that they can see exactly what they're working for, and that moment of connection that that Lindsay Keeley talked about, that moment of connection between adults and children, that's really what the goal setting program does, because it empowers teachers with resources to recognize children in the moment and say, I see you, I see that you're working, I see that you are here and I am here and we're doing this together. One of the other things that we worked with, particularly the Centennial School District in East Multnomah County on, was helping all of the families who the district identified as, needing support in special education. All of those families received sensory toolkits. So those toolkits had things like noise reducing headphones, so that kids who were, often working with, siblings and parents working and, dogs barking or whatever, they could pay attention, because they could, kind of focus in. Also fidgets and handheld tools, and then parent training resources, so that families could try to fill in for some of those support services and those kind of therapeutic services that staff like occupational therapists might have provided had the kids been going into school. We wanted to empower families to say, okay, we're here. We know you're not a therapist, but here are some things that you can do to help your child, maintain that emotional regulation and that physical regulation. So this year we're back in school. We're supporting teachers and students doing in-person learning. And our most important goal is to adapt programs to the needs of children and teachers as the pandemic continues to impact schools and our communities, because we know these impacts are not going to be resolved overnight. So again, I'm so thankful that we're all here today talking about these issues and how we can come together.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Sharon. And thanks again to all of you, Zalika, Lisa, Sharon, for sharing. It's really inspiring to hear about all of the creativity, the adaptability that your organizations had, that you did as you were leading all of those organizations in the face of the pandemic. And Sharon, thank you again for sharing some of the details about the impact of the pandemic, and specifically some of the solutions that you implemented and rolled out over the last 18, 20 months that we've had. So I have a question. This is for everyone. And I was thinking I would start first with Zalika and then move to Lisa and then come back around to you, Sharon. And that is, what can families be doing to support their kids through this time? And how can our communities support those families?
Yeah, families, I can't shout out our families enough. Oh my goodness, trying to manage all the things, because all the adult things that families were responsible for didn't stop while they were now suddenly responsible for all the things that were happening for their students. So I think first at Kairos, we would just say, kiss your brain, just give yourself props, right? We have to regulate ourselves as the adults and notice that, okay, we are doing a lot, and celebrate the wins, because it just keeps going. The needs are never ending. So that's my first encouragement to all you families out there, kiss your brains. It was a big deal. And it continues to be. I don't know. A lot of the settings are certainly sometimes you have to get back into quarantine, or, it's just, there's still uncertainty out there. So breathe deeply. All those social emotional strategies that are good for children turns out good for us also. So doing all of our self-care. And then I think children really do mirror us. They really do feed off of us, those families. So taking those moments to connect, even if you can't connect the whole time because you've got to get on a Zoom call, because you've got to do all those things, being really specific about I have, this minute, and then being consistent, right? Because there's so much uncertainty everywhere. So the more that we can be consistent, even if it's just 5 minutes of connection, come here, come snuggle me, come show me that thing that you're doing. Okay, now I got it. Now I got to go back. You go do your work. I'll go do my work. But that consistency and that regulation is really important, in that presence, right? Being present, even if it's for a short amount of time, goes so far with our young people. Being interested in what it is that they're learning. We talked or heard a little bit in the panel just before this one about asking elaborative type questions about things. Like we just encourage families all the time. Like when kids are learning stuff, just ask, tell me more. Tell me more. How did you do that? You know that already? How do you know that already? Just like that opportunity for kids to show what they know. That's what they want to do at home. They're willing to do their learning at school, but really at home, they want to show you what they know. So those opportunities to ask those questions, it also just shows care. Like I care about what you did today. I care about your learning, and I'm super impressed with your brain and the way that your brain works. I really appreciate like programs like the Shadow Project that just keep front and center. Hey, right? Like there are lots of kids for whom you need to make some special accommodations, and they are fabulous and deserve that. And that's the same that I just encourage all of our families. Like every single one of your children's brains are just different and they're fabulous. So celebrating and helping your child know that exactly what they're thinking and doing and learning is just right for them is exciting, is really important, especially when we look at the fact that we know that it was not a typical year. And the typical growth, right, that you might see in a kindergartner, first grade or second grade year, it's not gonna look typical, right? But for each child, as opposed to carrying anxiety as families about like, oh, you know, are you behind or what? But to be like, it is so exciting to see your brain work. Like I see how much you can do, and I'm so excited about what you're learning about, is such a more positive frame for children because we need to like make up some space and make up some time, but it's not going to be because everyone around you is anxious. Like it's because everyone around you believes in you. So really encouraging families to take that stance. And you were reminding me, Lisa, when you were talking about giving book to anybody that'll stand still. Like one of my goals for last year in the pandemic, I was like, I want every single one of our kindergartners to have a home library. They can't be at school with all the books. They got to be at home with all the books. SMART stepped up and supported us with that. Thank you so much. Children's Book Bank stepped up and supported us with that. Thank you so much. Was just talking to a family yesterday who was saying we were able to give families about 50 books. We were able to provide them one of those square bookshelves, you know, to house all those books. And the family was just saying, we're still in love with those books. We still go through those. So like the modeling of the fact that books are interesting and exciting it goes so far. And even as an adult, like if you read, show them, I love this book. I'm so excited about this book, or, you know, this newspaper, or this, whatever it is you're reading, or even if it's on a tablet, like, don't you just love reading? Like the more that we get to be that model for them, the more it becomes a genuine exchange of learning and how exciting learning is. And I guess the last thing that I would say about all the uncertainty around the pandemic, the more, and someone in the former panel spoke to this too, the more we can create routine, like in our daily lives for our young people, the better, right? The more, and sometimes they'll push back on it. That's okay. That's all right. That's why we get to be grown, because we know that routine helps all of us to get through when different things are uncertain. So building in those rituals and those routines, especially ones that involve books, but even ones that are just like when we get home at the end of the day, like you do a rose and a thorn, something that was great and something that was hard, like just any of those type of routines and rituals that connect us together, so vital during this time. Thanks for asking the question.
Yeah, thank you, Zalika. I love that. I really resonate with all of those and the rituals and routines. And I'll just restate the question, and in case anyone's just tuning in now. And so that is, what can families be doing to support their kids through this time? And how can our communities support our families? So I'll pass it over to you, Lisa.
Yes, thank you so much. And Zalika, I am stealing from you, Kiss Your Brain. I love that. So that I'm adopting that as well. I love that. And so Zalika too, thank you for all your very real concrete strategies. And I would like to underscore, highlight all of those for sure. I think what I would also add to that is and what we're seeing now is that children and families are getting registered for preschool, which is great. We also coordinate enrollment for Preschool Promise for 23 different providers in our community. And we are like 97% full. Last year, I don't think we even got above 63. So I'm just really thankful that the community at large and families at large are saying, preschool really is important, even though it's still a scary time. just always encouraging families to seek out opportunities, high quality opportunities, whether it be Preschool Promise or Head Start, or in a center or home-based care. Look for that high quality for your child. I think that's just really an important thing, which will also hopefully help alleviate some of those pressures of all the things that parents have to do that's on their plate, even during this very stressful time. I would also just really encourage families to also just, like Zalika said, take a breath, relax, and focus on the now, focus on the moment, really work to create those connections with your child, and also create those connections with your provider. And just making sure that you're in a really good communication about, what's happening during the day, what behaviors are being exhibited, what are some things that you can do at home to help to support the learning and the educational opportunities, and back in the care provider's home. And I think, that the impact of the isolation of the pandemic is really, really a thing. Children are experiencing, they've been, isolated for 20 months, and that's hard on everybody. And we're seeing a lot of providers really struggle with some of those big behaviors. And so as a parent, really connecting with your provider just to make sure that you can be that help and support and that guide. And all else fails, cuddle up with your kiddo with a really good book, and create that bond between you and the child, as well as really helping to, that in and of itself promotes some of that self-regulation. And it will also then help to just sort of model how wonderful reading is, and also help to build those early literacy supports. So all else fails, sit down with the book, cuddle up, have some hot chocolate, and just relax.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, I think that is really good advice. All right, so the question is, what can families be doing to support their kids through this time? And then how can communities support their families? So Sharon, I will hand it over to you for that same question.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I second and third everything that Zalika and Lisa have said. And, I wanted to offer, I think we've got a real theme of like connection and recognizing moments. And at the Shadow Project, we call it spotlighting victories. And victories look a lot of different ways. And you as a parent or caregiver, you know what your child's victories are, and victories are often not the end point, but they're in process, right? So one thing that I think families can do, and it is self-regulatory, is build a habit of, like, even if it's just once a day, that routine of creating connection with your child by spotlighting a positive, recognizing something that they're doing that is positive, that they've been working on. So, we ran a program this summer that helped families set goals with their kids and recognize and spotlight progress towards those goals. And so, some of those things might be recognizing, I see you really working hard to, to come sit at the table for 5 minutes, or I see you, you're sitting down to do your homework right after you get home from school. So just having those positive moments. And, I wanted to offer that on our website, we actually have a whole family resource about goal setting with kids, and it has a whole section on spotlighting victories. And that's at shadow-project.org/family resources. So that's something that if you're listening and you're curious to hear more, is available to everyone.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that URL. So this next question I have here for you, Zalika, and that is if you have any observations that you would share as kids are now back in the building, back in person.
Yeah, so turns out school's really important. Kids really like it, which is what we're seeing a ton of. There's just more, kids have more understanding of the fact that it can go away, right? Like it's not, they can't take for granted the fact that, oh, I get to go out and play with my friends, or I get to hang out with my friends in the classroom, which is kind of lovely, actually, that they just are coming in. And we serve kindergarten through fifth graders. So coming in with so much appreciation for like, I'm so glad to see you. It's pretty fabulous and lovely. I think the other thing that we're seeing is that it does take some time to build stamina, right? Like it's been a very different kind of learning environment for a really long time. You could, eat your breakfast while you listen to your morning meeting. You could kind of hang upside down if you wanted to while you were practicing your, so it is taking some time and some thoughtfulness to build stamina. And let me just be real, for the adults too, who haven't actually, had to be out of our slippers like by 7:45 every day and in the classroom. So a lot of grace for ourselves. But kids also, they're so hungry to learn. Like they missed it. There's a feeling, right, when you hit a challenge in learning and you grow and you see that. And it's so wonderful to be a part of getting to have kids be back and doing that together, right? They've been doing it, to your point, Sharon, like in isolation, right? But they're now getting a chance to do that together and support each other. I think we really understand, we always have really valued play. We really understand the value of play in a different way, I think, as a school community, and the opportunity for kids to be together and sort of relearn what it's like to ask for something and then hold a boundary and then not be able to have it right this moment. And then all of those self-regulation pieces that, often are part of preschool, often are part of kindergarten. We're finding we need to do some reminding. But what is interesting, right, is because we're having to do it with kids that are older than what we typically see, but we also see that gap closing really quickly. So it's like they're developmentally ready for it, they just didn't practice it. So then when they get a chance to practice that, doing, and I guess that's another encouragement for families too, is that is one of the big shifts when kids come back to school, as opposed to being able to be on their own schedule, right, and be that unit of consideration. Like we have to share and remember what it is to be in part of community again. And as much as there's joy in that, there's also practice in that and self-regulation in that, which are also really deeply important. I think families are really responding in huge ways to the uncertainty that still exists in school. So really appreciate that. We definitely have had to have kids, okay, so now we're going to go into quarantine, you're going to go back online. So that is still a part of children's reality. And they're incredibly flexible and optimistic, and they show up and they're there and they're ready. So yeah, shout out to the kids as well. But it is so, for those of us who work with children, right, we didn't get into this so we could be on screens with them. We got into this so we could be in community with them. And it is so wonderful to have kids back, even though we have to do some reminders. It is really wonderful to see kids back in the building again.
That's so great to hear, and really neat just to hear that I want to go to school. That just excitement around being back in person is really cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. My next question I have is for you, Sharon, and that is, will you be working with children at the school this year for this school year, do you think? That was from Penny in the chat, so thank you, Penny, for your question.
Yeah, the Shadow Project is in schools. Some of our programs we are facilitated through special education teachers. So all those programs are running, and they have been running, and that's the goal setting program. So teachers are setting goals with kids, and they're recognizing kids' progress, and they're having their Shadow Day celebrations. So those are happening. Our Reading Mentors program, where we pair kids with a specialized reading technology that allows them to read at their comprehension level and their developmental level, even if their actual reading decoding skills are not at grade level. And then we pair them with a mentor who helps them set goals to read more. Those programs are running. So, there's a lot of adaptation, right? Of making sure that things are safe and healthy for everybody. But we are in schools this year.
That's so great. I'm so glad to hear that. So I have one final question. This is for the group. So maybe Lisa, I'll start with you on this one, and then we can go around the horn to Zalika and then just back to Sharon. And that is, how can the community help you and your work in this upcoming year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. And my approach to the work that we do is we're always doing this in community. And so part of what we do as an early learning hub is bringing people together, and really, whether it's magnifying the great work that's happening in communities, or coming alongside in communities, adding resource to events. I think that's, or not just events, but programs or initiatives. I think it's just really important to come together to be able to do that work. Another thing that we are really also going deeper into some particular neighborhoods where the demographics and the data coming back, whether it's attendance rates or whether it's socioeconomic, whatever the fact may be, going in neighborhood by neighborhood. And part of what we're doing is connecting with the neighborhood and building parent-led councils to be able to help us as whether it's nonprofits or other organizations, to be able to connect in a very real way that is going to be meaningful for families. And so I think it's just always really important for those of us in these types of organizations just to always be listening to what the community really wants and needs, and being able to deliver it in a way that is going to be realized and valued, and it will be meeting families where they are. So that, to me, is probably the most important thing, is to just really step back and listen, and then get into action.
Yes, those are great. Thank you, Lisa. So again, we're talking about how can community help you and your work. So I'll pass it over to you, Zalika.
Thanks, Anna. So we are about equity. We're about closing racial achievement and opportunity gaps. And so we think about what that is, to really understand the system that we're in, that we're still recovering from, and how we might make it a more just community for all of our children. So we think about ways to help. Like, often we sort of say, well, okay, so what is the work that each individual person is doing around race, around culture, around the sort of sphere of influence that each one of us has? Is we certainly try and do our work here in the school around building up each individual child's identity and the positivity about who they are, connecting them to their intellectual heritage across the different ethnicities and races, certainly, that are represented in our school and in our world. And then we invite families and every single person listening on this call to do that work for ourselves, right? What is it that we know about ourselves, our culture, our racial identity, our story that has gotten us to here? What is it that we don't know that we need to find out more about? How is it that we can be people who ask those questions in our sphere of influence, be that your own children, your own grandchildren, your neighbor children? We all have a sphere of influence with children. And if our sort of corporate orientation is, well, let's ask more questions, let's read more stories, let's find out about who we are, let's connect around the sort of brilliance across races and across cultures and across histories. If children are seeing that in school, that's one thing. If children are seeing that in school and at home and at the grocery store and when they go to the park and when they hang out over at their grandma's house or their auntie's house, well, now we've done some system change, right? That just sort of ripples out. So there's always work that each one of us can be doing in our own stance and our own understanding of what it means to be involved in moving toward equity. And so we always invite everyone into that work. And then thinking carefully about what that means about what I'm reading to children, what conversations I'm having with children, like how am I representing race in the conversations that I have in my sphere of influence. So aside from, getting involved, any opportunity that you get to be involved with young people, do it with a consciousness around the power that we have to create a more just world and to give kids an opportunity to see and become and do something different than what we have done in the past.
Thank you. That's such a great reminder of just the role that we can all play within our own spheres of influence and help create some of that systems change that you talked about. So thank you. So Sharon, I'll pass it over to you. And the question is, how can community help you and your work?
Thank you, Anna. I think that our community can help the Shadow Project by being aware and really understanding what's at stake for students with learning challenges right now, their families, and really the whole community. So as I mentioned before, even before COVID, actually just 42% of Oregon students with disabilities graduated high school on time with a standard diploma. And I'm just going to pause and let that number sink in. Because the overall Oregon high school graduation rate is like 76, 77%. And students with disabilities are at 42%. So that's thousands of students left behind each year. Now at the Shadow Project, and I think among our group here, and I know many of you who are listening, you recognize that students with disabilities can achieve and deserve so much more. And so we have an opportunity now, I think, to look for ways to really rethink our education system and how we think about education. And I'm so happy with all the conversations like the ones we're having today, where we really think about children's social emotional learning, and we really think about how children are developing from a whole child perspective, and we think about how kids, how their innate talents and gifts can be drawn out through education and through schooling. And so, anything that that we can all do together to impact change in our systems, like Zalika said. And I think for students with disabilities, really thinking about some of the attitudes that we might have about what students are capable of, and then rethinking that and thinking, okay, where did that belief come from? Is that based on reality, or is that based on something that was given to me? And we can reject those belief systems, right? We can say, nope, I don't need that anymore. And so, I just invite anyone to again, join the Shadow Project. We have lots of volunteer opportunities. Again, if you're in kind of the Multnomah County area, or in the Salem-Keizer area, or just, look at our website and look at our work. And there's lots of ways to get involved. If it's something that, you think, okay, I want to know more information. I want to, be part of the change that the Shadow Project is trying to make.
Thank you so much. So I think that brings us to the end, and maybe if we have just 1 or 2 minutes, if we want to go around and share maybe the URL of where everyone who's on watching here today with us to learn more about your organization. So maybe Lisa, I'll start with you if you want, and then we'll go to Zalika and then Sharon, and then we will wrap up.
So our website is parentinghub.org.
Wonderful.
We are at kairospdx.org.
And Shadow Project is shadow-project.org.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again to all of you, not only for joining us today for this discussion. It's been really wonderful to hear from all of you. but for the impactful work that you're doing in your communities and for the kids in Oregon. So let's give them a round of applause and thank you so much.
Yes, what a phenomenal session. Skill sets, experiences that was shared during that session. I'm so grateful for the panelists there. So thank you so much. And thank you, Anna, for leading us through that conversation. And Chris, this has just been a wonderful day. We've learned so much about all the things that are supporting our kids and with learning and reading in our communities.
I couldn't agree with you more, Ray. It was a wonderful opportunity. The conversations were rich with perspective and information. It was just a glorious time together. And I found myself thinking a number of times, wow, these are great tips for supporting kids, but these things will work for me too. The volcano breathing and kiss your brain and spotlight the victories, take the win. So thank you, panelists, for all of that. And speaking of celebrating the win, thank you to all of you for taking the time to join us this afternoon for our first literacy conference. We're glad that you were here. We also invite you to join us again in April when we will support and host another of these similar conferences, this time all about the beauty and the power of diverse books and literature for kids. So thank you for being with us here today. Thank you for your care and your concern for kids throughout Oregon and your interest in supporting them and their families and getting our youngest students into that and advanced on that joyous journey of learning to read.
Yes, phenomenal. I'm still processing the volcano breathing. You're gonna be doing that later today. Thank you again. I'll reiterate that what Chris has stated. Thank you again to everybody for being a part of this event. As we wrap up today's event, a couple housekeeping items. First, that this recording of today's event will be up on this particular website in a couple of days. So be sure to look out for that if you want to get a refresher, a recap on some of the strategies and techniques that was taught by our amazing panelists. We'll also send this out to everybody who's registered too. So be sure to look out for that in your emails. And then a few of our panelists have provided of some of the resources focusing on the concrete strategies in supporting kids in literacy and social and emotional learning. And we'll post those to this website and send that out to everybody who is registered. Be sure to be following Smart Reading on their website at smartreading.org, as well as follow all of them on their social media accounts to learn more about the strategies and the amazing work that they're doing in the community for our kids in the state of Oregon. We can't thank you again for being a part of this event and enjoy the rest of your day. Talk to you soon.